My sister married a prince. I was not invited. She told me I was an embarrassment to our family and banned me from the venue. So I stayed home in my paint-splattered clothes. But 3 hours into the televised ceremony, the royal guards arrived at my apartment door. The king had stopped the wedding and demanded my presence immediately. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who ended up holding all the cards. My name is Jasmine. I am 35 years old. The text message from my younger sister Chloe lit up my phone screen on a rainy Tuesday morning in Boston. The words were as sharp as glass. I am taking you off the guest list. You are an embarrassment, and your plain aesthetic does not fit the royal optics. Do not show up to Newport. I sat at my heavy wooden work desk, my hands covered in a fine layer of bronze dust, and stared at the glowing screen. For a fraction of a second, the familiar childhood sting of rejection fluttered in my chest. But at 35, I was far beyond crying over my sister's cruelty. I did not type out a defensive reply. I did not call my parents to beg for intervention. I simply swiped left, deleted the message, and picked up my magnifying glass. My family had finally said the quiet part out loud, and honestly, the silence that followed felt like a gift. To understand how a text message like that gets sent, you have to understand the ecosystem I grew up in. My parents, Vivian and Winston, are staples of the black elite in Atlanta. My father built a highly successful corporate law firm, while my mother dedicated her entire existence to climbing the social ladder. Our lives were dictated by respectability politics, charity galas, and securing our place among the most influential families in the city. To Vivian and Winston, perception is not just reality, it is currency. You are judged by what you wear, who you know, and how perfectly you photograph. Chloe, who is 32, understood this game from the moment she could walk. She absorbed my parents' values like a sponge, crafting a flawless public relations-driven existence. She became a high-profile PR executive managing crisis control for minor celebrities and wealthy socialites. Her hair was always perfectly pressed, her designer outfits meticulously tailored, and her smile bright and entirely calculated. Then 2 years ago, Chloe hit the ultimate social jackpot. During a client event in Monaco, she met Prince Julian. He is a royal from a minor but obscenely wealthy European principality. He is white handsome and carries a title that dates back centuries. For my parents, Julian was not just a future son-in-law. He was the crowning achievement of their entire lives. Having a prince marry into the family meant they had officially transcended local high society and entered the global elite. From the moment the engagement ring slipped onto Chloe's finger, our family dynamic shifted from mildly toxic to completely unbearable. Every conversation became a strategic planning session about optics and royal protocol. My parents spent small fortunes upgrading their own wardrobes, practicing their etiquette, and dropping Julian's title into casual conversations at their country club. They were absolutely intoxicated by their proximity to the crown. And then there was me. I am an independent antiquities restorer. I spend my days in a dust-filled studio in Boston's South End, surrounded by crumbling artifacts, tarnished metals, and centuries-old textiles. I do not attend galas. I do not care about designer labels. I wear sturdy denim aprons and keep my natural hair pulled back in a simple bun to keep it out of the chemical solvents. To my parents, my profession is not just baffling, it is offensive. My mother has always described my work to her friends as playing with old junk. She could not comprehend why a highly educated black woman would willingly choose to get her hands dirty instead of pursuing a prestigious camera-ready career like law or medicine. I have always been the family scapegoat, the daughter who refused to mold herself into the perfect social accessory. Growing up, if I preferred reading a history book over attending a cotillion, I was lectured about embarrassing the family name. While Chloe was praised for her aggressive networking, I was criticized for my quiet nature. I was the dark cloud on their perfectly curated horizon. My plain aesthetic, as Chloe so viciously called it in her text, was simply my refusal to perform. But as the royal wedding in Newport, Rhode Island drew closer, my lack of performance became a perceived threat. The guest list was going to be packed with European aristocrats, billionaires, and international media. My family viewed my very existence as a liability. They were terrified I might wear the wrong shade of navy blue or mention my dusty workshop to a visiting countess. I set down my phone and returned my attention to the object resting on my workbench. It was a tarnished silver locket from the 18th century, completely disconnected from the frantic image-obsessed world my family inhabited. Working with history teaches you patience. It teaches you that true value lies beneath the surface, completely obscured by years of grime and neglect. My family, however, only cared about the surface. They spent their entire lives polishing their exterior while ignoring the rot underneath. When I was 20, my mother sat me down in our formal living room. I can still picture the exact shade of the cream-colored silk sofa she was sitting on. She handed me a brochure for an etiquette and networking seminar in Washington. She told me that if I did not learn how to present myself properly, I would end up entirely alone. She said Chloe knew how to play the game and that I was stubbornly choosing to lose. I remember looking at her, realizing for the first time that her love was entirely conditional. If I did not look the part, if I did not elevate the family brand, I was useless to her. That realization hurt then, but it armored me for the future. Over the past 15 years, I had built a massive wall between my professional sanctuary in Boston and their social theater in Atlanta. I skipped the minor holidays. I sent polite but brief birthday cards. I maintained a low profile. But a royal wedding was a mandatory event. Or so I had thought. Chloe's text message was not a sudden outburst. It was a calculated, deliberate strike. It was a decision made by committee. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that my mother and father had sat around their mahogany dining table with Chloe drinking expensive wine and debating how to handle the Jasmine problem. They had likely weighed the optics of an absent sister against the risk of an unpolished one. Clearly, my absence was deemed the safer bet for their precious royal optics. Just last month, when I had visited Atlanta for my father's 60th birthday, the tension had been palpable. Winston had pulled me into his home office, a room lined with leather-bound law books and framed photographs of him shaking hands with politicians. He had poured himself a glass of bourbon and looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. Jasmine, he had said, using his deep courtroom voice. Julian's family represents centuries of European tradition. The king is very traditional. We need everyone to be on their absolute best behavior. No messy natural hair, no talking about dirty restoration chemicals at the dinner table. Can you just pretend to be normal for one weekend? I had sat in his leather guest chair staring at the man who had helped create me, realizing he viewed my authentic self as a disease that needed to be managed. I had simply nodded, keeping the peace. I had actually gone out and bought an incredibly expensive, understated silk dress for the wedding, trying to accommodate his anxieties. I had booked a conservative hairstylist. I had tried to play the game, but clearly my efforts were deemed insufficient. Chloe's text message proved that no matter how much I tried to shrink myself to fit their mold, my very presence was an intolerable flaw in their masterpiece. The dress hung in my closet right now, a useless monument to my final attempt at daughterly obedience. I walked over to the closet, opened the door, and looked at the silk garment. It was beautiful, but it was not me. I reached out, pulled the dress off the rack, and tossed it into the donation bin I kept by the door. That simple action felt like a heavy chain falling from my neck. The relief was intoxicating. I did not have to pack. I did not have to practice uncomfortable small talk for a European king. I did not have to endure my mother's critical gaze adjusting my posture from across a ballroom. I was completely free. I returned to my workbench and let out a long, deep breath. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the Boston streets clean. Let them have their royal wedding. Let Chloe wear her crown and Vivian preen for the cameras. Let Winston shake hands with billionaires. I had my peace, my quiet studio, and my self-respect. I turned back to my work perfectly content to be the invisible, socially unfit sister. I had no way of knowing that my quiet Tuesday morning was merely the calm before a catastrophic storm, and that the royal family my parents worshipped was about to drag me out of the shadows and directly into the spotlight. The sharp trill of my cell phone shattered the quiet sanctuary of my studio. I stared at the screen resting next to my magnification lamp. The caller ID flashed a glossy, highly filtered photo of my mother Vivian. Under normal circumstances, seeing her name would send a spike of cortisol straight through my veins. It usually meant I had forgotten some arbitrary social rule or failed to send the correct type of floral arrangement to one of her sorority sisters or simply existed in a way that displeased her. But today, the ringing just felt like an annoyance. It was background noise. I let it ring 3 times. I wiped the bronze dust from my fingers using a microfiber cloth, taking my time. I knew exactly why she was calling. She was not calling to check on my feelings after Chloe sent that vicious text message. She was not calling to mediate a sisterly dispute or to play the peacemaker. Vivian did not do peacemaking. She did damage control. She was calling to close the loop to make sure I understood the text was an official decree from the family committee. I picked up the device and pressed accept. I did not say hello. I just brought the phone to my ear and waited. Jasmine. My mother said, her voice breathy and frantic. In the background, I could hear the echoing acoustics of a massive room and the sharp clicking of her designer heels on marble. She was already at the Newport estate. I could hear someone shouting directions about floral installations and caterers in the distance. The royal machine was in full motion. I received Chloe's text, I said, keeping my voice entirely flat. I stripped all emotion from my vocal cords. I offered her a blank slate. My mother let out a loud, dramatic sigh, the kind she usually reserved for delayed flights or slow valet service. She did not offer an apology. She leaned right into the justification. "You have to understand the pressure your sister is under," Vivian said. The tone of her voice was patronizing, dripping with the kind of condescension you use on a stubborn toddler. "The king is arriving tomorrow. The European press is crawling all over the perimeter of the estate. This is not just a wedding, Jasmine. Chloe is making history for this family. We are merging with royalty. We cannot afford any wild cards." I looked around my studio. My eyes drifted over a beautiful cracked ceramic vase from the Ming dynasty waiting for my attention. It had survived wars, famines, and centuries of changing empires. My mother thought a wedding to a minor European prince was making history. We lived in completely different realities. "I am not a wild card, Mom. I am your oldest daughter." The words left my mouth out of habit, a final reflexive defense of my own humanity. Vivian scoffed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "Please do not make this about you. We cannot have you sitting in the corner looking socially unfit while we entertain the king of a sovereign nation. You refuse to wear the designers we suggest. You insist on wearing your hair in those natural styles that just do not photograph well for the European magazines. You do not know how to converse with these types of people. What if someone asks what you do, and you start talking about scrubbing rust off antique spoons? It is just not the aesthetic we need to project right now." There it was, the raw, unfiltered truth. My family viewed my identity, my career, and my very blackness as a social liability. They were desperate to assimilate into a rigid aristocratic white space, and my refusal to bleach my skin or straighten my hair or hide my hands was a threat to their performance. I was too real for their fairy tale. I remained silent. I let her words hang in the empty space between Boston and Newport. I wanted her to hear the echoes of her own cruelty. When I did not argue, Vivian's tone shifted to a transactional cadence. She was a businesswoman closing a deal. She wanted to buy my silence and my compliance. "Look," Vivian continued, lowering her voice, as if someone might overhear her bribing her own child. "Your father and I appreciate you being reasonable about this. We really do. We know you are probably a little disappointed. So I am going to wire $1,000 into your account this afternoon. Take yourself out to a nice dinner in Boston. Go to that seafood place on the harbor you like. Treat yourself. Buy a new apron or whatever it is you need for your little workshop. We will send you the professional photographs when the magazine publishes them next month. $1,000. A payout to stay hidden. A hush money deposit so they could pretend they only had one perfect PR-savvy daughter who was fit for a prince. In the past, a comment like that would have crushed me. I would have argued. I would have cried. I would have desperately listed my accomplishments, reminding her of my master's degree, my elite clientele, the fact that my little workshop generated more legitimate revenue than my father's outdated law firm. I would have begged for her to see my worth. But as I stood in my studio listening to the frantic, hollow sounds of her social climbing in the background, I realized I did not want her approval anymore. I did not want to sit at a table where I had to shrink myself to fit the chairs. I did not want to share a room with people who viewed my existence as a stain on their royal canvas. I realized that their rejection was actually a rescue. "Keep your money, Mom," I said. My voice was calm, resonant, and completely unbothered. I do not need a consolation prize for missing a party I never wanted to attend in the first place. "Jasmine, do not be difficult." She snapped, her annoyance flaring instantly. "Do not play the martyr. We are doing what is best for everyone. I am not being difficult. I am being compliant." I said, my tone dipping into freezing temperatures. "You and Chloe do not want me there. I am not coming. The transaction is complete. You do not need to buy my absence. You already have it. Have a beautiful wedding." I did not wait for her to respond. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, cutting off the connection. The silence that rushed back into my studio was absolute and profound. It wrapped around me like a heavy, warm blanket. I stood perfectly still for several minutes, listening to the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I felt my shoulders drop. I felt the tension in my jaw release. I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations slide right off my back and crash onto the floor. I turned my phone on silent mode and tossed it into a desk drawer. I did not care if they texted again. I did not care if Chloe had second thoughts, which she would not, or if my father tried to call and smooth things over with legal jargon. They were muted. They were blocked from my physical and mental space. I walked over to the large industrial sink in the corner of my workshop. I turned on the warm water and grabbed a bar of pumice soap. I scrubbed my hands, watching the bronze dust and chemical residue swirl down the drain. I looked at my hands. They were strong. They were skilled. They possessed the knowledge to bring dead things back to life, to restore dignity to forgotten relics. My hands had purpose. My family could call my work playing with old junk, but I knew the truth. I preserved history. Chloe only cared about manufacturing it. I dried my hands on a clean cotton towel and walked toward the center of my studio. The room was massive, featuring exposed brick walls, giant arched windows letting in the gray Boston light, and heavy oak tables covered in specialized tools. It smelled of beeswax, lemon oil, and old paper. It was my kingdom. I had built it entirely on my own, dollar by dollar, client by client, without a single cent from Winston or Vivian. I walked over to my primary workbench. I pulled out my padded stool and sat down, adjusting the high-powered magnification lamp over my workspace. I took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of my sanctuary. I reached for my delicate restoration picks and a small vial of specialized cleaning solution. I leaned forward, my focus narrowing down to the millimeter. The noise of the outside world, the drama of the royal wedding, the stinging insults of my mother, all of it faded into absolute nothingness. I was Jasmine. I was an archivist. I was a master of my craft. I was completely disconnected from their toxic circus, and for the first time in 35 years, I was completely at peace in the silence. My family believes I scrape rust off forgotten spoons in a dingy basement. That is the lie I allow them to believe because it keeps them far away from my actual reality. The truth is much more complex and infinitely more lucrative. I am not a hobbyist. I am a master historical archivist and one of the top independent antiquities restorers in the Western Hemisphere. When the Louvre discovers a microscopic fracture in a Renaissance artifact, they consult my firm. When anonymous billionaires acquire undocumented relics at private auctions and require absolute discretion for authentication, my encrypted server is the only one they trust. My skill set requires degrees in chemistry, art history, and metallurgy. I hold security clearances that grant me access to private vaults from Geneva to Tokyo. My parents worship wealth and status, blindly unaware that my specialized knowledge commands commission fees that would easily pay off the mortgage on their Atlanta estate in a single afternoon. I prefer the shadows. In my industry, visibility is a vulnerability. Anonymity guarantees security. I push my stool away from the sink and glide across the smooth concrete floor of my studio toward my digital workstation. The setup is heavily modified, built to withstand cyber intrusions and secure the highly classified intellectual property of my clients. I place my thumb on the biometric scanner. The system reads my fingerprint, then prompts for a retinal scan. Finally, I type in a randomized 40-character alphanumeric passcode. The encrypted drive unlocks with a soft chime. I am not looking for anything specific, just indulging in the quiet satisfaction of organizing my completed dossiers. My fingers fly across the mechanical keyboard, bringing up the archived project logs from exactly 6 months ago. The folder is labeled only with a string of numbers. I remember the exact night this contract began. It started with an urgent encrypted email from a high-end broker based out of London. The man went by the alias Sterling. He dealt exclusively in recovering and repairing royal artifacts for aristocratic European bloodlines. Sterling did not ask for my availability. He demanded it, wiring a non-refundable retainer of $100,000 just to initiate a secure video call. During that call, Sterling's face was completely obscured by shadows. He spoke in a clipped, frantic British accent. A priceless heirloom had suffered catastrophic structural damage. It was required for a highly publicized state event in the near future. The owners were desperate. The piece could not be sent to a museum for repair because its current condition would cause a media scandal regarding the royal family's negligence of their own cultural heritage. They needed an absolute ghost. They needed a restorer who possessed the technical genius to fuse a shattered 17th century artifact and the professional discipline to never breathe a word of its existence. I accepted the contract. 3 days later, an armored transport vehicle arrived at the reinforced loading dock at the back of my Boston studio. 2 armed guards carried a climate-controlled titanium lockbox into my receiving room. They required my signature in wet ink, matched my retinas to a pre-approved database, and left without saying a single word. When I opened the lockbox, the breath caught in my throat. Resting on a bed of custom-molded archival foam was a majestic 17th-century European chalice. It was a staggering work of royal craftsmanship. The core was forged from solid, unblemished gold, heavy and dense. The rim and the base were encrusted with raw, uncut sapphires that caught the studio light and fractured it into a million blue shards. But the true masterpiece of the chalice was the intricate metalwork encasing the stem. It was a delicate woven cage made of an incredibly rare and unstable medieval silver alloy. And it was completely shattered. Someone had dropped the chalice. The impact had snapped the brittle silver alloy in 3 distinct places, threatening to detach the heavy gold basin entirely from its jeweled base. Sterling had been right to panic. It was a disaster. If handled incorrectly, the tension from the broken cage would snap the remaining unbroken bindings and the raw sapphires would be permanently displaced. The damage was considered irreparable by standard museum protocols. I spent the first 2 weeks just studying the metal. I ran non-invasive spectroscopic analysis on the shattered fragments to determine the exact chemical composition of the 17th century silver alloy. The original metalsmiths had used a highly specific flawed ratio of copper and silver, which made the metal visually stunning but structurally brittle over centuries. I had to recreate that exact flawed alloy in my own crucible. If I used modern purified silver to fuse the broken joints, the repair would be visually obvious. The metals would age and tarnish at different rates, exposing the restoration to any competent appraiser. I had to forge a metal that was exactly 300 years old in its chemical behavior. The physical restoration was a grueling test of endurance. I locked down my studio, completely isolating myself from the outside world. For 3 straight weeks, I worked under a high-powered stereo microscope. I used a micro-welding torch, equipped with a jeweled tip, applying heat in microscopic bursts. 1 millimeter of miscalculated heat would melt the original gold core. 1 fraction of a second of prolonged exposure would shatter the ancient sapphires into worthless dust. I practically held my breath for hours at a time, letting the rhythm of my heartbeat guide the steadiness of my hands. I carefully bridged the shattered gaps in the alloy cage, fusing the ancient metal with the chemically matched binding agent I had forged. The work required surgical precision. I sculpted the fresh joints to perfectly mimic the organic, slightly uneven hammering technique of the original 17th century silversmith. I then applied a rapid chemical tarnishing wash to the repaired sections, forcing the new metal to artificially age and perfectly match the natural patina of the surrounding silver. When the structural fusion was complete, the chalice was whole again. It looked immaculate. The gold gleamed, the sapphires sat securely in their settings, and the delicate silver cage held the piece together with seamless, invisible strength. To the naked eye, the chalice had never been broken. To a standard magnifying glass, the metalwork appeared completely undisturbed. I had performed a miracle of historical preservation. But I am a master archivist, and masters never leave a piece entirely unmarked. There is an unwritten rule in the highest echelons of the antiquities trade. True preservationists must always leave a way for future historians to identify their interventions. It prevents restored pieces from being fraudulently sold as completely untouched originals. It is a matter of absolute professional integrity. But beyond ethics, it is also a personal insurance policy. In a world of anonymous billionaires, secretive royal courts, and cutthroat brokers, credit is often stolen and blame is easily shifted. I never allow my labor to be entirely erased. I always leave a ghost. I pulled the chalice back under the highest magnification setting of my microscope. I rotated the heavy gold base until the underside was exposed. I located the thickest portion of the silver alloy binding that I had just successfully fused. I switched out my micro-welding torch for an ultra-fine diamond-tipped engraving laser. The tool is traditionally used in aerospace engineering for microscopic component tagging. Holding my breath, I carefully etched my maker's mark directly into the newly fused silver joint. The signature is impossibly small, completely invisible to the human eye, and undetectable by standard jeweler's loupes. It requires a specific wavelength of ultraviolet light and extreme digital magnification to be seen. The mark consists of my initials tightly interlaced with the geometric outline of a blooming lotus flower. It is elegant, undeniable, and permanent. It proves that I was there. It proves that the structural integrity of the artifact relies entirely on my specific chemical formulation and my physical labor. It is the ultimate seal of authenticity in a shadow industry built on secrets. Once the maker's mark was embedded, I carefully sealed the chalice back into its climate-controlled titanium lockbox. I documented every single phase of the restoration process. I took hundreds of high-resolution time-stamped macro photographs showing the before, during, and after states of the alloy binding. I compiled the chemical breakdowns, the heat exposure logs, and the final microscopic image of my hidden signature. I encrypted the entire dossier and sent it directly to Sterling via our secure, untraceable communication channel. The armored transport vehicle returned the next night. The guards took the lockbox, and 48 hours later, a wire transfer for $150,000 cleared into my offshore business account. The contract was officially closed. Sterling deleted his digital footprint, and I moved on to my next commission, assuming I would never see or hear about the spectacular sapphire and gold chalice ever again. I close out the archived project log on my screen and lean back in my chair. The memory of that intense, solitary labor brings a quiet smile to my face. That is the reality of my life. That is the scale of my capability. My family is currently gathered in a rented mansion in Rhode Island, desperately performing for a crowd of European aristocrats terrified of putting a single foot wrong. They view themselves as the ultimate arbiters of value, completely unaware that I hold the power to literally reconstruct the historical artifacts their new royal in-laws worship. I stretch my arms above my head, feeling the satisfying pop of my shoulder joints. The rain continues to beat against the large arched windows of my studio. I am completely safe here, insulated by my own competence and the vast, unbreachable wall of my financial and professional independence. I reach for my teacup ready to review the blueprints for my next restoration project, completely oblivious to the fact that the digital breadcrumbs of that anonymous royal commission are about to collide violently with my sister's wedding. I set my teacup down on the cork coaster beside my workstation. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the Boston streets slick and reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. I had been reviewing architectural blueprints for an upcoming cathedral restoration, my eyes straining from the intricate line work. I decided to take a mandated 15-minute screen break to prevent visual fatigue. I picked up my personal phone from the desk drawer where I had tossed it earlier that morning. I opened a social media application out of sheer muscle memory. My feed is usually curated to display museum acquisitions, chemical solvent reviews, and obscure auction house listings. But the algorithm has an insidious way of tracking digital proximity. Because my parents and sister had been relentlessly flooding the internet with wedding content, my Explore page served up a sponsored editorial feature from a premier global society magazine. The cover image featured Chloe and Prince Julian standing on the manicured lawns of the Newport estate. Julian looked exactly as a minor European royal should, tailored, aloof, and remarkably bland. Chloe, however, looked completely transformed. She was wearing a custom ivory gown that screamed old money restraint, a far cry from the flashy logo-heavy outfits she usually preferred. Her hair was pulled back into a severe traditional chignon. The headline read, "A Modern American Princess Bringing Cultural Preservation to the Crown." I almost scrolled past it. My sister's PR campaigns are notoriously heavy on buzzwords and light on actual substance. But the phrase cultural preservation made my thumb freeze over the screen. I tapped the article. The feature was a sprawling, overly romanticized profile of Chloe's journey to the altar. It detailed how she was not merely a public relations executive, but a woman with a deep private passion for European antiquity. I scoffed aloud. The only antiquity Chloe cared about was a vintage Chanel bag. But as I swiped to the third page of the digital spread, the air was knocked completely out of my lungs. There, displayed in a stunning high-resolution full-page photograph, was the chalice. It was sitting on a velvet pedestal inside what appeared to be the king's private study. The heavy gold core gleaming the uncut sapphires, radiating that distinct fractured blue light. And encasing the stem was the delicate 17th-century silver alloy cage that I had painstakingly reconstructed under a microscope just 6 months ago. I stared at the image, my mind racing to comprehend how an anonymous commission from a British broker had ended up in an editorial spread about my sister's wedding. I began to read the accompanying text. The article quoted King Edward himself. He praised his future daughter-in-law for an unprecedented gesture of cultural loyalty. The chalice, the article explained, was a sacred relic of Julian's royal house that had been severely damaged decades ago and hidden away due to the embarrassment of its condition. The king stated that Chloe had personally overseen and executed its miraculous restoration, presenting the fully healed artifact as a traditional dowry gift to the royal family. I read the words again, personally overseen and executed. Chloe was quoted in the very next paragraph. She spoke eloquently about the challenges of fusing ancient metals. She casually mentioned the specific flawed ratio of copper and silver in the 17th century alloy. She described the intense solitary labor required to protect the sapphires from the micro-welding torch. She used the exact terminology, the precise chemical breakdowns, and the specific historical context that I had written in my confidential encrypted dossier for Sterling. My sister was claiming absolute credit for my life's work. I sat back in my chair, the shock slowly giving way to cold, crystalline logic. I needed to understand the mechanics of this theft. How did a highly classified commission from a ghost broker end up in Chloe's manicured hands? I closed the magazine application and opened my secure browser. I initiated a deep dive into Sterling, the broker who had wired me the $150,000. It took me less than 10 minutes of navigating through corporate registries and shell companies to find the connecting thread. Sterling was not an independent broker. He was a senior acquisitions director for an elite London-based cultural heritage firm, and that firm retained a massive global public relations agency to handle their high-profile client NDAs. It was the exact same public relations agency where Chloe worked as a senior executive director. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. 6 months ago, the royal family had quietly reached out to Sterling's firm to fix their broken heirloom before the wedding. Sterling needed an absolute ghost, someone highly skilled, who did not exist in the traditional museum circuit. He found me. But all the documentation, the non-disclosure agreements, the insurance liabilities, and the final encrypted dossiers had to pass through the PR agency's secure servers for legal compliance. Chloe had access to those servers. She had seen the royal commission come across the desk. She knew the king was desperate to restore the chalice, and she saw the perfect foolproof opportunity to elevate her status from a commoner to a cultural savior. She had intercepted the final digital drop. She had downloaded the hundreds of time-stamped macro photographs I took. She had memorized my chemical logs and my metallurgical analysis. She had stolen my entire portfolio of the restoration process. Then, utilizing her immense skill for manipulating narratives, she had presented herself to King Edward as the mastermind behind the artifact's resurrection. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking, but the motive was brutally obvious. My parents and my sister were suffocating under the pressure of this royal merger. They knew that behind closed doors, Julian's family viewed them as wealthy but culturally vacant Americans. Vivian and Winston could buy all the custom suits and luxury cars in the world, but they could not buy lineage. They could not buy historical prestige. Chloe was terrified that the king would never truly accept her as a legitimate addition to their aristocratic bloodline. She needed a grand gesture. She needed to prove her cultural worthiness to a patriarch who valued history above all else. By presenting him with a flawlessly restored royal relic, she positioned herself not as a social climber, but as a guardian of their legacy. She used my brilliant invisible labor to purchase her seat at the royal table. A normal person might feel a surge of hysterical rage. A normal person might immediately call their sister, screaming through the phone, threatening to call the media and expose the fraud. A normal person might call their parents and demand justice. But I am not a normal person, and I stopped expecting justice from Vivian and Winston decades ago. I felt a cold, predatory calm wash over my entire body. My family had spent my entire life calling me socially unfit. They had mocked my profession. They had banned me from their crowning social achievement because they believed I would embarrass them in front of the king. Yet the only reason the king was welcoming my sister into his family was because she was wearing my genius like a stolen coat. I did not pick up my phone to call Chloe. I did not text my mother to demand an explanation. Giving them a warning would only give Chloe time to deploy her crisis management team. It would give my father time to draft aggressive legal threats. It would allow them to control the narrative. Instead, I turned back to my digital workstation. I initiated a full localized backup of my entire encrypted server. I took high-resolution screenshots of the magazine article, specifically capturing the quotes where Chloe detailed the metallurgical fusion process. I cross-referenced those quotes with my original time-stamped dossier sent to Sterling 6 months ago. The plagiarism was exact down to the specific decimal points of the chemical ratios. I pulled up the broker's ledger. I verified the wire transfer routing numbers, the dates of the armored transport deliveries, and the biometric access logs from my studio's loading dock. Every single piece of data proved unequivocally that the chalice was in my physical possession in Boston during the exact 3 weeks Chloe was allegedly restoring it. I saved all of this raw, indisputable data onto a secure standalone hard drive. Then I pulled up the final, most crucial piece of evidence, the extreme magnification image of my maker's mark. The microscopic interlaced initials, and the geometric lotus flower, permanently etched into the 17th century silver alloy, binding on the underside of the heavy gold base. It was the one detail I had never included in the dossier sent to Sterling. It was my ghost signature, completely unknown to anyone but me. Chloe had stolen my notes, but she had never actually touched the chalice. She had no idea my name was literally carved into the metal she had just handed to the king of a sovereign nation. I locked the hard drive in my fireproof safe. I shut down my monitors. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the darkening Boston skyline. My family had orchestrated my exclusion with flawless, cruel precision. They believed they had successfully removed the embarrassing dusty sister from their royal fairy tale. They believed their lie was absolute and airtight. I decided to do absolutely nothing. I chose the luxury of silence. I would not crash their wedding. I would not send an angry email to the press. I would simply sit in my beautiful, quiet sanctuary and watch their magnificent house of cards collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. The truth has a funny way of surfacing, especially when it is etched in ancient silver. Let them celebrate tonight. Let them drink their champagne and toast to their royal future. Tomorrow the king's appraisers would undoubtedly examine the dowry gift, and my family's stolen legacy would trigger a detonation they could never possibly control. The morning of the royal wedding arrived with a gentle, unobstructed sunrise that spilled across the hardwood floors of my Boston apartment. There were no frantic knocks on my door. There were no hysterical phone calls demanding I fix a misplaced floral arrangement or adjust the lighting for a photograph. There was only the steady, comforting hum of the city waking up outside my window. I stretched my arms above my head and breathed in the cool morning air. Today was the day my family had spent the last 2 years hyperventilating over. Today was the day Chloe was scheduled to officially merge our bloodline with a European principality. And I was gloriously, entirely alone. I walked into my kitchen and put the kettle on the stove. The simplicity of the action felt like a profound luxury. I selected a robust Earl Grey blend, measuring the loose leaves with the same precision I used for my chemical solvents. While the water heated, I tied my hair back into a functional knot at the base of my neck and slipped into a pair of worn, comfortable linen trousers and a soft cotton sweater. There were no restrictive silk gowns to squeeze into. There was no professional makeup artist waiting to contour my face into a more acceptable European standard of beauty. There was no Vivian hovering over my shoulder inspecting my cuticles and reminding me not to speak unless spoken to. I was perfectly unapologetically myself. I poured the steaming water over the tea leaves and inhaled the rich bergamot scent. Carrying my mug, I walked into my living room, which doubled as an extension of my restoration studio. The space was an organized haven of artifact catalogs, lighting rigs, and secure display cases. I felt a deep, resonant wave of peace wash over me. For the first time in my 35 years, I was completely unburdened by my family's relentless social ambitions. I did not have to monitor my tone, check my posture, or suppress my personality to fit their rigid country club aesthetic. My exclusion from the guest list was intended to be the ultimate punishment, a brutal exile meant to remind me of my lowly place in the family hierarchy. Instead, it had granted me absolute liberation. I sat down at my secondary workbench and opened my secure laptop. I had 3 new commission requests waiting in my encrypted inbox. One was from a private maritime museum in Stockholm, requesting a consultation on a corroded brass navigational instrument from the 18th century. Another was from an anonymous estate liquidator in New York, seeking authentication of a potentially undocumented Renaissance textile. I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. This was real power. This was actual, undeniable influence built on expertise and grueling labor. My family was currently 70 miles away in Rhode Island, desperately performing for the cameras, praying they would be accepted by a group of aristocrats who viewed them as novelties. I did not need to perform. My worth was concrete, verifiable, and entirely my own. I picked up the television remote and turned on the large flat screen mounted on the far wall. I kept the volume relatively low. Every major news network and global entertainment channel had dedicated their morning programming to the event. The broadcast cut to sweeping high-definition aerial shots of the sprawling historic estate in Newport. The property was a masterpiece of Gilded Age architecture, surrounded by towering iron gates and manicured gardens that stretched directly down to the ocean. The scale of the event was staggering. Hundreds of white folding chairs were arranged on the great lawn facing a massive floral arch constructed of imported white orchids and cascading greenery. The news anchors were in an absolute frenzy. They spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the modern fairy tale unfolding on the American coast. They dissected the guest list with breathless excitement, flashing graphics on the screen, detailing the arrival of foreign diplomats, international film stars, and billionaire tech moguls. It was a masterclass in public relations, precisely the kind of spectacle my sister had trained her entire life to orchestrate. The camera panned to the grand entrance of the estate, capturing the arrival of the elite guests. Black luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway, discharging women in extravagant fascinators and men in sharp morning suits. I watched the screen with clinical detachment. I did not feel a single ounce of jealousy. I only felt a profound exhaustion on their behalf. Every person stepping out of those vehicles was participating in a highly choreographed theater of wealth. They were assessing each other, judging the cut of the fabric, the size of the diamonds, the proximity to the royal family. It was a suffocating environment, an atmosphere entirely devoid of genuine human connection. Suddenly, the camera zoomed in on a familiar couple standing near the grand stone staircase of the main house. It was Vivian and Winston. My parents were in their element. Winston wore a tailored tuxedo that looked rigid and uncomfortable, but his posture was puffed up with aggressive pride. Vivian was wearing an icy blue couture gown that cost more than my first car. She was smiling, but it was not a smile of joy. It was the shark-like, victorious grin of a woman who had finally conquered the social summit she had been climbing her entire life. She was shaking hands with a European countess, laughing at a joke with her head thrown back just the right amount, ensuring her profile caught the sunlight for the photographers. I watched them perform and felt a strange, hollow pity. They had staked their entire reputation, their entire identity on this single afternoon. They genuinely believed that tying their name to Prince Julian would validate their existence. They had discarded their eldest daughter without a second thought, convinced that my absence was the final necessary sacrifice to secure their royal ascension. They had absolutely no idea that they were standing on a trapdoor. The broadcast switched back to the studio anchors. A brightly smiling woman with immaculate blonde hair began discussing the romantic details of the ceremony. She mentioned the custom wedding bands, the imported champagne, and then right on cue she brought up the dowry gift. The screen split to show a graphic of the 17th century silver and gold chalice. The anchor praised Chloe, describing her as a brilliant public relations executive with a surprising and deep devotion to European cultural heritage. The anchor enthusiastically relayed the story Chloe had manufactured, detailing how the bride had personally overseen the miraculous restoration of the shattered relic, presenting it to King Edward as a symbol of unity and historical respect. The commentators gushed over the poetic nature of the gesture, calling it a brilliant bridging of American modernity and European tradition. I took another sip of my Earl Grey tea. The bergamot tasted sharp and clean. I watched my stolen labor being broadcast to millions of viewers around the globe. I watched my sister's massive, fragile lie being cemented into the public record. There was no anger left in my system. The rage had burned itself out the previous night, leaving only cold mathematical certainty. I opened a new tab on my laptop and began drafting a response to the Maritime Museum in Stockholm. I requested high-resolution macro images of the corroded brass instrument and attached my standard non-disclosure agreement. I typed with steady rhythmic strokes, the clicking of the keyboard blending with the muted voices of the television anchors. On the screen, the coverage shifted to the arrival of the royal motorcade. The camera zoomed in on a heavily armored vehicle bearing the crest of the king. The anchors announced that King Edward had arrived at the estate with his personal security detail and the royal appraisers. The appraisers were there to officially receive the dowry gift and transport it back to the royal vaults following the ceremony. I stopped typing. I looked at the television screen, watching the heavy doors of the armored vehicle open. A man with silver hair and an imposing, rigid posture stepped out. King Edward. Behind him, two men carrying specialized testing equipment and archival transport cases followed. These were the experts. These were the men who understood the chemical composition of 17th-century silver alloys. These were the men who knew how to use ultraviolet light and extreme digital magnification to verify structural integrity. The trapdoor was opening. I closed my laptop and set it aside. I leaned back in my chair and rested my hands on my lap. The Boston morning remained utterly peaceful. The rain from the previous night had completely cleared, leaving a bright, sharp blue sky. I listened to the distant sound of a siren echoing down a nearby street, a stark reminder of the real world outside my sanctuary. Inside my studio, everything was perfectly controlled. Everything was exactly where it belonged. I watched the royal appraisers walk up the grand staircase of the Newport estate, their faces serious and focused. They were walking directly into the room where the chalice was waiting. They were walking directly toward the microscopic maker's mark etched into the fused metal. The mark that consisted of my initials tightly interlaced with the geometric outline of a blooming lotus flower. The mark that Chloe did not know existed. I took one final slow sip of my tea. The broadcast showed a digital countdown clock in the corner of the screen. 2 hours and 45 minutes until the royal ceremony was scheduled to begin. I set my mug down on the workbench. The calm before the storm was beautiful, but I knew the devastation to come would be absolute. I simply sat in the silence, comfortably wrapped in my own truth, and waited for the explosion. The tranquility of my studio was absolute, filled only with the soft, methodical scratching of my stylus against my digital tablet. I was deep into drafting the chemical solvent protocols for the Swedish Maritime Museum, completely absorbed in the intricate geometry of 18th-century brass. I had actively chosen to leave my personal cell phone face down on the far edge of my secondary workbench. I wanted the physical distance. I wanted the psychological barrier between my controlled productive reality and the chaotic social theater playing out 70 miles away in Rhode Island. Then the vibration started. It was not a gentle, isolated notification. It was a relentless, aggressive, rhythmic buzzing against the polished concrete surface of the desk. The sound grated against the quiet atmosphere of the room like a physical intrusion. I did not immediately reach for the device. I carefully saved my structural analysis to the encrypted drive, took a slow breath, and placed my stylus perfectly parallel to the edge of the tablet. The buzzing escalated from a steady pulse into a frantic, sustained alarm. I walked over to the workbench and picked up the phone. The screen was blindingly bright, overflowing with a waterfall of notifications. They were all pouring in from the family group chat. My mother had titled the chat The Atlanta Vanguard years ago, a deeply pretentious nod to her obsession with positioning our family at the absolute forefront of Black elite society. I usually kept the Vanguard muted, checking it only to confirm holiday logistics or to acknowledge obligatory family announcements. Today, however, the Vanguard was experiencing a catastrophic meltdown in real time. I unlocked the screen and watched the text bubbles rapidly populate one after another, overlapping in their urgency. The carefully curated PR-approved vocabulary my family usually communicated with had completely evaporated. In its place was raw, unfiltered panic. The royal machinery had finally collided with my sister's stolen narrative, and the impact was detonating right in front of me. My father was driving the interrogation. Winston is a man who utilizes words like surgical instruments in a courtroom, always precise, always calculated, and always designed to control the narrative. But his messages this morning were a jumbled, desperate mess of typos and incomplete sentences. Jasmine picked up the phone the first text read. Less than a minute later, a second message appeared. The king's appraisers are in the main study with Chloe. They are asking questions about the chalice. Then the barrage truly began. They brought out ultraviolet scanners and digital magnification tools. Chloe is panicking. They are talking about the alloy binding on the stem. She does not know what to tell them. They are asking about the specific chemical wash used on the fusion points. Answer me right now. I leaned back against the edge of my workbench, staring at the bright text illuminating the screen. A slow, chilling smile touched the corners of my mouth. The appraisers had found the micro-welds. They were doing their jobs perfectly. Any royal historian worth their title would immediately recognize that the chalice had been structurally compromised and fused back together. The fact that the repair was flawless would only make them press harder for the exact methodology. They were demanding the chemical composition used to bind the ancient silver, the very specialized information Chloe had stolen from my encrypted dossier, but lacked the fundamental metallurgical knowledge to actually explain under pressure. She had memorized the buzzwords, but she did not understand the science. Under the scrutiny of actual experts, her performance was crumbling. Winston's texts grew increasingly hostile, shifting from panic to authoritarian demands. Did you leave a mistake on it? What did you do to the metal? Fix this if they call you. Tell them you were the clumsy subcontractor who misread the blueprints. Take the blame for the alloy discrepancy. Do not embarrass us today. We have too much on the line. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his demand hit me like a physical wave. He was not asking for my professional help. He was ordering me to fall on my sword. He wanted me to confess to being an incompetent, careless subcontractor in order to shield his golden child from the consequences of her own massive, premeditated fraud. They had banned me from the property. They had deemed me a social liability. They had instructed me to hide in Boston because my natural hair and sturdy clothes did not fit their aristocratic aesthetic. Yet the very second their royal fairy tale began to hemorrhage, they demanded I absorb the blame. They wanted me to clean up the catastrophic mess they had created by stealing my life's work. I watched a new message from my mother pop up on the screen. Jasmine, answer your father right this instant. Chloe is in tears in the corner of the study. The king looks absolutely furious. Do something before he cancels the procession. They were completely spiraling. The pristine ivory tower of their social ambition was actively burning to the ground, and they were desperately reaching for the daughter they had designated as the family scapegoat to throw onto the flames. They genuinely believed that I would sacrifice my professional reputation to save their social standing. I did not feel a single ounce of obligation. I felt no pull of familial duty. I felt no instinct to protect them. I felt only a profound, unshakable clarity. I placed my thumbs on the digital keyboard of my phone. I did not type out a defense of my restoration techniques. I did not explain that my work was flawless, and that the only mistake on the chalice was the thief claiming credit for it. I did not waste my breath telling them about the microscopic maker's mark permanently etched into the silver joint, waiting like a dormant landmine under the royal appraiser's ultraviolet scanners. I simply typed a response that honored the exact boundaries they had brutally set for me just 24 hours ago. I'm socially unfit to advise on royal matters. Try Google. I hit send. I did not wait to see the inevitable explosion of angry typing bubbles. I immediately toggled the settings on the group chat, swiping the button to mute all notifications indefinitely. I set the phone face down on the desk and pushed it far away from me. The silence in my Boston studio returned thick, heavy, and absolute. I turned my chair back toward the television monitor mounted on the far wall. The broadcast had been running continuously, showing the endless parade of wealthy guests mingling on the manicured lawns of the Newport estate. The network anchors were filling the airtime with breathless, sycophantic commentary about the imported floral arrangements and the historical significance of the European royal family's visit to America. I watched the screen with clinical, icy detachment. For 3 hours, the coverage maintained its glossy celebratory sheen. The cameras panned across women in pastel couture and men in morning suits, all holding crystal champagne flutes and waiting for the grand procession to begin. But then the atmosphere on the broadcast began to shift. It was subtle at first. The camera feeds showing the grand entrance of the main house started to look erratic. The reporters standing on the designated press perimeter of the estate pressed their earpieces deeper into their ears, their overly bright, rehearsed smiles faltering. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowds of elite guests on the lawn. People were checking their phones, whispering behind gloved hands, casting nervous, darting glances toward the heavy oak doors of the estate's main study. The doors remained firmly shut. The anchors in the news studio exchanged bewildered looks on camera. One of them touched her earpiece, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. The flawless orchestration of the event was breaking down in real time, and the media had absolutely no idea how to cover it. The scheduled time for the bride's emergence came and went. The string quartet playing on the lawn looped their classical repertoire for a third time. Suddenly, the live feed of the Newport estate abruptly vanished from the screen. It was replaced by a generic static graphic of the network's logo. A stark white news ticker appeared across the bottom of the television screen. It read, "Temporary delay in royal proceedings at Newport Estate." The studio anchors scrambled to fill the dead air, their voices tight with manufactured calm. They frantically suggested a minor scheduling hiccup, a last-minute wardrobe malfunction, or perhaps a delay in the arrival of a key diplomat. They speculated wildly, trying to maintain the joyful tone of the broadcast while managing the obvious crisis unfolding behind closed doors. But I knew the absolute truth. There was no scheduling conflict. There was no torn zipper on a couture gown. The trapdoor had fully swung open under my family's feet. The appraisers had found the discrepancies. The king had demanded answers that Chloe could not provide. The massive golden lie my sister had constructed to buy her way into royalty had completely shattered. I sat in my sturdy, comfortable chair, surrounded by the tools of my trade, and watched the static graphic on the television screen. The fallout was about to be biblical, and for the first time in my life, I had a front-row seat to my family's destruction from the safest distance possible. The static graphic of the news network remained frozen on the large flat screen mounted on my studio wall. I watched the white text announcing the temporary delay in the royal proceedings for a few more minutes, soaking in the absolute finality of it. The lie had hit the wall. The impact was complete. I reached for the remote, pressed the power button, and the television faded to a glossy black rectangle. The sudden absence of the frantic media commentary left my Boston apartment wrapped in a profound, heavy silence. It was the kind of quiet that follows a massive storm, clear and deeply settling. I pushed my chair back from the workstation and stood up. There was no reason to monitor the broadcast any longer. My family was currently trapped in a high-stakes interrogation 70 miles away, suffocating under the weight of their own manufactured reality. They had barred me from their presence because they believed my authentic self would tarnish their pristine image. Now they were drowning because they had tried to wear my authenticity as a costume. I felt a fleeting sense of clinical fascination about how they were attempting to spin the situation, but I felt zero desire to intervene. I walked over to the kitchen island and poured the remaining Earl Grey tea down the stainless steel sink. I rinsed the ceramic mug and set it carefully on the drying rack. I had work to do, true, tangible work that required my full cognitive presence. I tied my natural hair back into a tighter knot at the base of my neck, smoothing the edges down. I slipped my heavy denim apron back over my linen trousers and cotton sweater, securing the brass clasps at the waist. Returning to my primary workbench, I focused my attention on the Ming Dynasty ceramic vase resting under the magnification lamp. It was a beautiful, tragic puzzle. The previous owner had attempted an amateur repair, using a highly acidic commercial glue, completely disregarding the porous nature of the ancient clay. I needed to formulate a customized neutral solvent to gently dissolve the modern adhesive without further degrading the original material. I pulled on a pair of tight nitrile gloves and began measuring precise drops of chemical agents into a glass beaker. I lost myself in the rhythm of the chemistry. The smell of the solvent, a sharp, clean odor, filled the immediate airspace around the workbench. I calculated ratios, documented my mixtures on a fresh digital log, and prepared the micropipettes. The world outside my arched brick windows ceased to exist. I was entirely grounded in the physical reality of preservation. Time became fluid, measured only by the careful application of the solvent and the slow, satisfying yield of the damaged adhesive. Nearly 2 hours passed in absolute concentration. I was just reaching for a specialized bristle brush to clear away a microscopic layer of dissolved glue when a sound tore through the quiet atmosphere of my studio. It was a knock at my front door. It was not the hesitant, polite tapping of a delivery courier. It was not the quick, familiar rap of a neighbor. It was heavy, rhythmic, and incredibly forceful. 3 solid, measured strikes against the heavy oak wood of my apartment door. The sound possessed a distinct military precision. It reverberated through the floorboards, vibrating up through the soles of my shoes. I paused, holding the bristle brush perfectly still in midair. My studio is located in a secured, repurposed industrial building in the South End. Visitors require an access code to bypass the lobby, and I had not authorized anyone for entry today. 3 more strikes echoed through the apartment. They were identical in cadence and force to the first set. I carefully placed the brush down on a sterile mat. I removed my nitrile gloves, peeling them off my dark skin with a sharp snap, and tossed them into the disposal bin. I walked away from the workbench, wiping my hands on the front of my denim apron, and moved toward the entryway. I did not feel fear, only a sharp analytical curiosity. I approached the heavy door and pressed my eye to the digital security monitor mounted on the adjacent wall. The high-definition camera feed revealed the hallway outside. Standing in a tight, disciplined formation were 3 men. They were not building management. They were not local Boston law enforcement. They were wearing impeccably tailored charcoal black suits that spoke of bespoke European craftsmanship. Their posture was rigid, their hands clasped loosely in front of them, their expressions entirely neutral and unreadable. I noticed the subtle, transparent, coiled wires disappearing behind their ears, connecting to discrete communication devices. The man standing at the front, directly facing the camera lens, had the hardened, observant eyes of a predator trained to anticipate every possible variable in a room. This was not a casual visit. This was an elite security detail. I understood immediately. The blast radius of my family's lie had reached Boston. I did not hesitate. I reached out, disengaged the heavy deadbolt, unlocked the secondary latch, and pulled the door open. The 3 men did not shift their stance. The lead guard looked at me. His eyes quickly scanned my face, dropping briefly to note my denim apron and casual attire before returning to meet my gaze. He did not look at me with the dismissive contempt my family often employed. He looked at me with the intense, calculated respect of a man executing a high-priority objective. "Jasmine Williams," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, and carried a distinct, clipped European accent. It was not a question. It was a confirmation of his target. "Yes," I replied. My voice was calm, anchored deep in my chest. I kept my posture relaxed but commanding, leaning slightly against the doorframe. "Can I help you?" The lead guard did not offer a pleasant greeting. He did not introduce himself or his associates. He simply reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored jacket and withdrew a slim, matte black digital tablet. He activated the screen with his thumb and turned the device around, holding it up to my eye level. "Please observe the screen, Miss Williams," he instructed quietly. I looked at the high-resolution display. It was showing a complex, multispectral imaging scan. The interface was sophisticated, indicating a live feed from a highly specialized appraisal laboratory. In the center of the screen was an extreme microscopic magnification of silver metal. I recognized the terrain of the metal instantly. It was the exact structural joint of the 17th-century alloy cage I had fused together 6 months ago. The image had been processed through an ultraviolet filter. There, glowing brightly against the dark ancient silver, was my ghost signature. The crisp geometric lines of the blooming lotus flower were unmistakable. Tightly interlaced within the petals were my initials. It was a flawless, undeniable fingerprint. The royal historians had done exactly what I knew they would do. They had utilized extreme digital magnification to verify the integrity of the repair, and in doing so, they had triggered the dormant landmine I had deliberately left behind. I looked at the glowing blue image on the tablet, and a profound wave of validation washed over me. My meticulous labor, the grueling hours spent under the microscope, the chemical mastery required to forge that joint, it was all staring back at me. My sister had tried to erase my existence to buy her way into royalty, but my signature had outlasted her entire public relations strategy. I lifted my gaze from the glowing screen and looked directly into the lead guard's eyes. I did not feign ignorance. I did not ask what the image meant. I gave him a single slow nod of confirmation. The guard pressed a button on the side of the tablet, turning the screen black, and smoothly returned the device to his jacket pocket. He adjusted his stance, squaring his shoulders. "His Majesty King Edward requests your presence," he stated, his tone carrying the absolute, uncompromising weight of a royal decree. Immediately, the word hung in the air between us. It was a summons that bypassed all standard protocols. It bypassed the media, the public relations agencies, and the frantic damage control currently suffocating my family. The king of a sovereign nation had discovered a massive, humiliating fraud within his own inner circle, and he had dispatched his personal elite guard to retrieve the only person who held the actual truth. I looked at the three men standing in my hallway. They were prepared to escort me forcibly if necessary, but their demeanor indicated they preferred cooperation. They expected me to be intimidated. They expected me to be flustered by the sudden insertion of global aristocracy into my quiet Boston life. I was neither. I was an archivist. I was the master of my domain, and I had all the receipts. "I need 3 minutes," I said, my voice projecting absolute authority. I stepped back and began to close the door. The lead guard moved his hand slightly, a reflexive motion to stop the door. But he caught my eye and stopped. He recognized that I was not a flight risk. I was a professional preparing for a consultation. 3 minutes. "Miss Williams," he agreed, stepping back into formation with the other two men. "We have a vehicle waiting downstairs." I shut the door and engaged the lock. I did not rush. I moved with deliberate economic precision. I walked over to the disposal bin and quickly unclasped my denim apron, letting the heavy fabric drop. I walked into my bedroom and exchanged my comfortable cotton sweater for a sharp, highly structured black blazer. I kept my hair pulled back in its tight, functional knot. I was not dressing to impress a royal court. I was dressing as a master restorer reporting to a work site. I walked back into the studio and went directly to my fireproof safe. I punched in the numeric code, opened the heavy steel door, and retrieved the standalone encrypted hard drive. It contained the entire unadulterated history of the Royal Commission. The broker's ledger, the wire transfer routing numbers, the chemical logs, and the hundreds of time-stamped macro photographs showing the chalice in my physical possession. It was the ultimate undeniable weapon of truth. I placed the hard drive into a sleek leather briefcase, along with my secure iPad and my physical access keys. I grabbed my trench coat from the hook by the door. I took one last look around my quiet, meticulously organized studio. The Ming Dynasty vase sat patiently under the lamp, waiting for my return. The space felt exactly as it had an hour ago, yet everything had shifted. I was no longer the discarded daughter, hiding in the shadows of my family's ambition. I was the expert they desperately needed. I opened the front door. The three guards were waiting exactly where I had left them. "I am ready," I said, stepping into the hallway and locking the door behind me. "Let us go see the king." The heavy oak door of my apartment clicked shut behind me, sealing my sanctuary away. I turned to face the three men in tailored black suits. They moved with immediate synchronized precision, forming a protective triangle around me as we navigate the hallway toward the private service elevator. My leather briefcase containing the encrypted hard drive and my secure tablet hangs heavy and solid in my grip. It is the only anchor I need. We descend to the subterranean parking garage in absolute silence. The doors slide open to reveal a massive armored black SUV idling on the concrete. Its tinted windows offer zero visibility into the interior, projecting an aura of total, impenetrable authority. The lead guard opens the rear passenger door, gesturing for me to enter. The plush obsidian leather seats absorb my weight as I slide inside, placing my briefcase squarely on my lap. The doors slam shut with a heavy pressurized thud, instantly cutting off the ambient noise of the garage. As the vehicle accelerates up the concrete ramp and merges onto the bustling Boston streets, I notice the flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the surrounding brick buildings. A discreet but highly effective police escort has cordoned off our route. Two unmarked interceptor vehicles flank our SUV, seamlessly parting the dense afternoon traffic. We bypass gridlock entirely, slipping onto the southbound interstate with the smooth, relentless momentum of a predator tracking its prey. The interior of the SUV is immaculate, smelling faintly of expensive leather and ozone. The lead guard sits in the passenger seat facing me. His broad shoulders squared, his earpiece glowing with a faint blue indicator light. He observes me for a long moment, evaluating my completely tranquil demeanor. He clearly expects anxiety, perhaps even the frantic, tearful panic my sister is undoubtedly displaying right now. He receives nothing but my steady, unwavering gaze. He nods a subtle gesture of professional respect and formally introduces himself as Commander Elias. He informs me that it is his duty to brief me on the exact parameters of the current crisis before we reach the Newport estate. I tell him to proceed. Elias speaks with a clipped, efficient cadence, delivering the details like a tactical debriefing. He explains that the morning commenced flawlessly, exactly according to my family's meticulously orchestrated public relations timeline. Chloe presented the dowry gift to King Edward in the grand study, surrounded by a select group of royal dignitaries and my beaming, socially victorious parents. The king, deeply moved by the return of his family's sacred relic, summoned his chief royal archivist to officially receive and catalog the chalice. This is where the grand illusion violently collided with reality. Elias details how the chief archivist, a man who has spent 4 decades specializing in 17th century European metallurgy, approached the artifact. He did not simply admire the gleaming gold or the radiant sapphires. He produced a specialized ultraviolet magnification lens and began a rigorous microscopic inspection of the delicate silver alloy cage. Elias explains that the archivist immediately noted the structural fusion. He recognized that the piece had been completely shattered and expertly reconstructed. The archivist turned to my sister, offering profound praise for the sheer genius of the repair, and asked a highly specific, fundamentally critical question. He asked her to describe the exact thermodynamic gradient she utilized to fuse the unstable copper and silver ratio without thermally shocking the adjacent sapphires. He asked her to identify the specific flux compound necessary to prevent oxidation during the micro-welding process. I feel a cool, sharp smile forming on my lips as Elias relays this information. It is the ultimate trapdoor question. Chloe had memorized the broad terminology from my stolen notes. She knew the words alloy fusion and structural integrity, but she possessed absolutely zero practical understanding of the applied chemistry required to execute the repair. Elias tells me that Chloe froze. She offered a vague, generic response about careful heat application, a hollow answer that instantly triggered the archivist's suspicions. He pressed her for the exact chemical composition of the binding agent. Chloe began to stammer, her carefully curated composure fracturing in real time under the weight of true, undeniable expertise. The breakdown was swift and absolute. Elias leans forward, his voice dropping an octave as he describes the scene in the grand study. King Edward, a man whose entire reign is predicated on loyalty and absolute truth, immediately sensed the deception. He demanded an explanation for the glaring discrepancies in Chloe's narrative. Under the terrifying weight of the monarch's direct interrogation, my sister's fragile facade shattered completely. She panicked. But rather than confessing to her monumental theft, Chloe deployed the only survival tactic she has ever known. She found a scapegoat. Elias looks at me, his eyes searching my face for a reaction, as he delivers the final devastating blow. Chloe wept, clutching her custom couture gown, and told the king that she had been deceived. She claimed that while she had overseen the project, she had hired a local clumsy contractor to handle the physical labor. She explicitly named me. She told the royal court that her estranged, deeply unstable sister Jasmine was the one who actually touched the metal. Chloe wove a frantic, desperate lie insisting that I must have ruined the piece, that I must have compromised the sacred relic out of bitter, petty jealousy over her royal engagement. She framed herself as the tragic, trusting victim of my malicious incompetence. I listened to this account without moving a single muscle. My hands remained resting lightly on my leather briefcase. The sheer magnitude of her betrayal is staggering, yet completely unsurprising. Vivian and Winston raised us in a zero-sum environment where survival meant pushing someone else down. From the time we were children, Chloe has blamed me for every broken vase, every stained dress, and every missed curfew. She was perfectly willing to destroy my professional reputation, my career, and my freedom to shield herself from the consequences of her own boundless greed. Elias pauses clearly, waiting for an outburst of rage or a frantic defense of my character. When I offer nothing but a slow, calculating nod, he continues with the final phase of the briefing. The king did not offer Chloe sympathy. He did not comfort her. The revelation that a priceless sacred heirloom of his bloodline had been handled by a supposedly unstable, clumsy contractor enraged him beyond measure. He views the preservation of history as a sacred duty. The implication that his family's legacy was treated with careless disregard was the ultimate insult. Elias confirms that King Edward halted the wedding proceedings instantly. He ordered the massive oak doors of the grand study locked from the inside. He confined Chloe, Vivian, and Winston to the room, placing them under the direct supervision of his royal guard. He instructed his communications director to issue the temporary delay notice to the global media currently swarming the estate lawns. Then he dispatched Elias and the elite security detail to Boston, with a single uncompromising directive: bring the contractor to Newport to answer for her crimes against the crown. The SUV speeds along the coastal highway, the landscape outside the tinted windows blurring into a wash of gray and green. We are closing the distance rapidly. The flashing lights of our police escort clear the final traffic barriers as we enter the wealthy, secluded enclaves of Rhode Island. I look down at my briefcase. Inside sits the encrypted hard drive containing every single photograph, every chemical receipt, and every secure email exchanged with the royal broker. I hold the absolute, undeniable truth in my hands. My parents had tried to bury me. They told me I was not fit to stand in the presence of nobility. They believed that by throwing me out of their gilded circle, I would simply disappear into the background noise of their pristine lives. But they vastly underestimated the foundation I had built for myself. My sister thought she could use my life's work as a stepping stone and then discard me to save her own skin when the climb became too steep. Chloe told the king I was a clumsy saboteur. She told him I was a jealous, incompetent liability. She handed me the role of the villain on a silver platter, entirely unaware that I am fully prepared to play the executioner. The tension in the vehicle shifts as we approach the towering iron gates of the Newport estate. I can see the throngs of media vans parked along the perimeter, satellite dishes, raised reporters speaking urgently into cameras regarding the unprecedented delay of the royal nuptials. Elias taps his earpiece, communicating silently with the ground team waiting for our arrival to coordinate a secure entry away from the press lines. I take a deep, centering breath, adjusting the lapels of my structured black blazer. I am not walking into a trap. I am walking into an arena, and my family has unknowingly handed me the only loaded weapon. I run my thumb along the smooth leather handle of my briefcase, feeling the solid weight of the evidence inside. The years of being silenced, of being the convenient target for Vivian's criticisms and Chloe's manipulations, are officially over. The vehicle slows as the massive gates swing open, granting us entry into the epicenter of the scandal. I am ready. The armored SUV slows to a steady crawl as we navigate the winding gravel-lined driveway of the Newport estate. Through the heavy tinted glass of the passenger window, the full breathtaking scale of the disaster is visually stunning. Hundreds of elite guests are stranded on the manicured lawns. I spot international diplomats pacing nervously near the blooming rose gardens, clutching their cell phones with strained, panicked expressions. Hollywood actors and Silicon Valley billionaires stand in awkward, hushed circles, completely stripped of their usual untouchable confidence. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms carry silver trays of untouched champagne, standing frozen like statues, unsure whether to serve the drinks or retreat rapidly to the kitchens. The orchestral music has ceased, entirely replaced by the low, anxious hum of 1,000 people, realizing they are trapped inside a spectacular social collapse. My family wanted a global audience to witness their ascension into royalty, and they have successfully captured one. Every single person on this lawn is watching the shipwreck unfold in real time. Commander Elias speaks softly into his wrist microphone as our vehicle bypasses the grand main entrance completely. We veer aggressively onto a discreet service road, heavily guarded by local police officers and royal security personnel who instantly part to let the black vehicle through. The SUV comes to a halt near the sprawling catering tents erected at the rear of the property. The contrast is incredibly sharp. On the other side of the towering manicured hedges, my family's fabricated fairy tale is bleeding out for the world to see, while back here the machinery of the estate is frozen in utter confusion. Elias opens my door. The humid Rhode Island air hits me immediately, carrying the heavy scent of saltwater and crushed white orchids. I step out onto the pavement, my grip firm and uncompromising on the leather handle of my briefcase. I do not look back toward the lawns. My focus remains entirely locked on the imposing stone facade of the mansion. We do not walk through the grand foyer or the main ballroom. Elias leads me directly through the service corridors. It is a labyrinth of white-tiled hallways and bustling service staff who immediately freeze and flatten themselves against the walls as the royal security detail marches past. The intense juxtaposition of my presence here is not lost on me. Yesterday morning, Vivian informed me that I was strictly forbidden from stepping foot anywhere near this property. She deemed me a permanent stain on their perfect tapestry, banished to my studio in Boston, so I would not accidentally breach their fabricated protocol. Today, I am marching through the very heart of the estate, flanked by the king's personal guard, moving with the unstoppable, devastating velocity of a wrecking ball. The irony is as thick as the humid air outside. The service corridor transitions abruptly into the main house. The utilitarian white tiles give way to intricate parquet flooring, and the walls are suddenly lined with gilded mirrors and massive oil portraits of long-dead aristocrats. The air conditioning is aggressive, chilling the slight layer of sweat on my skin. We move up a grand sweeping staircase, our footsteps completely muffled by a thick crimson Persian runner. The ambient noise of the confused guests outside fades into nothingness, swallowed entirely by the immense insulated silence of the mansion's upper levels. My heartbeat is slow and deeply measured. I'm evaluating my surroundings with the exact same clinical icy detachment I use when entering a volatile restoration site. I'm not entering this space as a sister or a daughter. I am entering as an expert witness called to a crime scene. We approach a wide, dimly lit hallway dominated by a pair of massive, intricately carved oak doors. Two more royal guards stand at rigid attention on either side, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. Elias gives them a brief, authoritative nod. He turns to me, his expression stony, but carrying a distinct layer of professional respect. He does not offer me empty words of encouragement or unnecessary warnings. He simply gestures toward the heavy wood. This is the threshold. This is the absolute boundary between the fragile lies my family has constructed and the unyielding truth resting inside my briefcase. Elias pushes the heavy oak doors open. They swing inward on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing the room beyond. I step across the threshold and directly into the lion's den. The grand study is a masterclass in Gilded Age opulence, but the atmosphere inside is incredibly toxic. Dark mahogany bookshelves stretch from the polished floor to the vaulted ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive fireplace carved from black marble dominates the far wall. The air in the room is suffocating thick with raw fear, expensive perfume, and the sharp, undeniable tang of nervous sweat. My eyes sweep the room, categorizing the occupants with immediate surgical precision. Seated behind a massive antique desk in the absolute center of the room is King Edward. He is an imposing, terrifying figure. He does not look angry in the traditional sense. He looks violently calm. His hands are steepled precisely on the leather desk pad, his silver hair is immaculate, and his posture radiates the terrifying absolute authority of a man who possesses the power to ruin entire bloodlines with a single command. Resting on the desk directly in front of him, glowing ominously under the harsh purple light of an ultraviolet inspection lamp, is the 17th century silver and gold chalice. It is my chalice. Standing near the fireplace is Prince Julian, the handsome, previously bland royal, who served as my family's golden ticket, now looks remarkably pale and ill. He shifts his weight uncomfortably from foot to foot, tugging nervously at the stiff gold-embroidered collar of his ceremonial uniform. He looks completely out of his depth, a man who expected a seamless, highly publicized wedding and has instead found himself locked in a room with a ticking bomb. He refuses to look at his bride. And then my gaze shifts to the corner of the room where my family is standing. Chloe is positioned near the heavy velvet drapes. The custom ivory couture gown that looked so flawless and pristine on the magazine cover is now a tragic, wrinkled mess. The heavy silk fabric seems to be swallowing her alive, dragging her down to the floor. Her perfect traditional chignon is unraveling completely damp strands of hair, sticking to her forehead and neck. She is actively sweating her expensive makeup smeared around her eyes, where she has been rubbing them in panic. She looks exactly like what she is, a desperate fraud who has just been completely cornered by undeniable expertise. Next to her stand Vivian and Winston, my parents, the chief architects of my lifelong exclusion. Winston's rigid, aggressive pride has completely vanished. His tailored tuxedo looks entirely too loose, his shoulders slumped as he stares at the king with an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. Vivian looks even worse. The icy blue gown she wore like a suit of armor is visibly trembling. Her knuckles are stark white as she aggressively clutches her designer handbag to her chest, treating it like a shield against the incoming destruction. The moment I cross the threshold, all movement in the room ceases completely. The oxygen seems to instantly vaporize from the air. Vivian's eyes lock onto mine, and the remaining color drains rapidly from her face, leaving her skin an ashen grayish tone. Her mouth opens slightly, but her vocal cords refuse to produce any sound. She is staring at the daughter she ordered to stay hidden, the daughter she attempted to bribe into silence, now standing in the absolute center of the room, flanked by the king's personal elite guards. Winston stares directly at my briefcase, his sharp legal instincts clearly screaming at him that whatever I am holding is going to utterly destroy their lives. Chloe lets out a sharp, pathetic gasp, taking a physical step backward until her shoulder blades hit the heavy wood of the window frame. She knows exactly why I am here. She knows that I hold the chemical receipts to the lie she just attempted to feed the monarch sitting at the desk. I do not shrink under their horrified, panicked stares. I do not look away, nor do I offer any reassuring gestures. I step fully into the room, holding my head high and perfectly straight. My tailored black blazer feels like impenetrable armor. My spine is rigid, my jaw set with absolute conviction. I am entirely composed, a solid, immovable pillar of calm in a room that is actively drowning in panic. The silence stretches agonizing, heavy, and profound. I look directly at Chloe, watching the terror vibrate through her chest with every shallow breath she takes. Then my gaze slides slowly to Vivian and Winston, offering them nothing but a cold, calculating emptiness. They wanted a flawless performance. They wanted an elite, respectable aesthetic. I am bringing them brutal, unfiltered reality. I step forward, closing the distance between the doorway and the antique mahogany desk, entirely ready to dismantle their entire universe piece by microscopic piece. The suffocating silence in the grand study shatters the moment my leather boots strike the polished hardwood floor. I am barely 3 steps into the room before my mother launches her desperate counter-offensive. Vivian does not hesitate. She has spent her entire adult life managing crises and bearing family secrets under layers of expensive silk and forced smiles. She sees the absolute ruin walking toward her, and she immediately deploys the most vicious weapon in her social arsenal: character assassination. She steps forward, attempting to insert her trembling body between my advancing figure and the heavy mahogany desk where King Edward sits. She does not address me. She does not look at me. She directs her wide, artificially panicked eyes entirely toward the monarch. She clasps her hands together in a posture of profound, tragic, maternal sorrow. It is a performance she has likely been rehearsing in her mind the entire time she was locked in this room, waiting for the executioner to arrive. "Your Majesty, I must apologize for this appalling intrusion," Vivian says. Her voice is breathy, vibrating with manufactured distress. She pitches her tone perfectly, aiming for the helpless aristocrat who is entirely at the mercy of a chaotic element. "This is my estranged daughter, Jasmine. I beg you not to listen to a single word she says. She has severe mental health issues. She is deeply unwell and has been obsessed with sabotaging Chloe for years. I do not stop walking. I do not break my stride. I process her words with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. Vivian is weaponizing the very real, very human struggles I faced in my 20s, twisting my past anxiety into a convenient diagnosis of current insanity. It is a brilliant, terrifyingly effective public relations tactic. If she can successfully brand me as a delusional, jealous lunatic, then any evidence I produce becomes the fabricated ravings of a madwoman. She is trying to poison the well before I can even draw a single drop of water. Winston immediately falls into line right beside her. My father adopts a posture of weary, heartbroken paternal defeat. He places a comforting hand on Vivian's shoulder, shaking his head slowly as he looks at the king. "It is a tragedy, Your Majesty." Winston adds, his deep baritone dripping with fake remorse. "We have tried for years to get her the psychiatric help she so desperately needs. But her jealousy over her younger sister's success has completely consumed her. We barred her from the estate today for everyone's safety. Her presence here is a malicious, calculated attempt to humiliate us on the global stage." I keep walking. The heavy soles of my boots continue their steady, rhythmic advance across the Persian rug. I am acutely aware of the royal guards standing perfectly still behind me, their presence a silent ironclad barrier, preventing my parents from physically stopping my approach. Taking her cue from our parents, Chloe initiates the second phase of their desperate theatrical production. The waterworks begin with spectacular intensity. She collapses dramatically against the edge of a velvet armchair, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders heave with violent manufactured sobs. She looks up at Prince Julian, her eyes swimming in tears, mascara deliberately smudged to emphasize her victimhood. She reaches a shaking hand out toward him, begging for the protection of her royal fiancé. Julian does not move a single muscle to comfort her. He remains absolutely rigid by the fireplace, staring at her with an expression of dawning horror and profound disgust. "Julian, please, you have to believe me," Chloe wails. Her voice is high and ragged, perfectly tuned to evoke sympathy. "She did this. Jasmine did this to me. She has always hated me. She has always wanted to destroy my happiness. She found out about the dowry gift. She knew how important the chalice was to your family." Chloe pushes herself off the armchair and takes a stumbling step toward the center of the room, pointing an accusing, trembling finger directly at my chest. "She broke into my private files." Chloe screams, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the study. "I spent months researching that restoration. I consulted with the greatest minds in Europe. I worked myself to the bone to preserve your family's legacy. But she stole my notes. She hacked into my secure servers and copied my metallurgical analysis. And then she snuck into the venue and maliciously altered the silver binding just to ruin my wedding day. She wants to destroy me because she is nothing but a bitter, lonely failure. The sheer audacity of the lie is breathtaking. She is actively accusing me of cyber espionage, corporate theft, and the premeditated destruction of a priceless royal artifact. She is spinning a narrative so convoluted, so entirely unhinged from reality, that it requires a massive suspension of logic to even entertain. But she sells it with the desperate, clawing conviction of a woman who knows she is standing on the absolute edge of a sheer cliff. She is weeping, shaking, and pleading with the royal men to throw me out of the room before I can speak a single word. I finally reach the edge of the antique mahogany desk. I am standing less than 3 feet away from King Edward. I can see the deep lines etched into his weathered face, the sharp intelligence calculating every single variable in the room. I can see the heavy gold and sapphire chalice resting on the leather desk pad between us, glowing faintly under the residual light of the ultraviolet inspection lamp. I do not raise my voice to defend myself. I do not shout over my sister's hysterical sobbing. I do not turn to look at my mother and father to demand an explanation for their vicious betrayal. I know that engaging with their hysteria will only validate their narrative. If I yell, I am the angry, unstable black woman they just described. If I cry, I am the emotionally fragile sister who cannot handle the pressure. If I try to defend my sanity, I immediately legitimize the accusation that my sanity is up for debate. The only appropriate response to manufactured chaos is absolute terrifying stillness. I stand perfectly straight. My breathing is deep, slow, and completely regulated. My facial expression is a blank, impenetrable fortress. I let Chloe's frantic accusations bounce off me like rain against solid granite. I let my mother's gaslighting evaporate into the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere of the study. I do not give them a single micro-expression of pain, anger, or fear to feed upon. I starve them of the emotional reaction they so desperately require to complete their performance. I lift my right hand and smoothly set my heavy leather briefcase down onto the polished surface of the mahogany desk. The dull, solid thud of the leather striking the wood cuts through Chloe's sobbing like a physical blow. The sound demands immediate, undeniable authority. It is the sound of hard, verifiable evidence entering the battlefield. I keep my eyes locked entirely on King Edward. He is the only person in this room who matters. He is the judge, the jury, and the executioner of this entire grand illusion. He sits completely motionless behind the desk, his silver hair catching the ambient light, his posture radiating a dangerous, quiet power. He has watched my family perform their desperate, weeping circus act. Now he is watching me. He is looking for the instability my mother promised. He is looking for the malicious jealousy my sister described. He is looking for the erratic, unpredictable behavior of a broken, discarded woman. He finds none of it. He finds a master archivist. He finds a woman who possesses the precise, devastating knowledge required to dismantle this entire fraudulent empire. He sees the absolute certainty radiating from my posture, the cold, unyielding confidence of someone who holds every single receipt. We communicate in a silent, profound language of shared authority. He knows that I am not here to engage in a petty family squabble. I am here to execute a professional demolition. The silence stretches between us, thick and electric. Behind me, the frantic energy of my family begins to curdle into sheer terror. They are slowly realizing that their desperate performance is failing. The king is not calling for his guards to drag me away. The prince is not rushing to embrace his weeping bride. The royal men are ignoring the noise and focusing entirely on the silent, steady woman standing at the desk. I reach down and place my hands on the twin brass locks of my briefcase. The metal is cool beneath my fingertips. I do not break eye contact with the monarch sitting across from me. I press my thumbs against the mechanisms, and the locks disengage with 2 sharp simultaneous clicks. The sound echoes through the grand study, sounding exactly like the cocking of a loaded weapon. "Your Majesty," I say. My voice is low, smooth, and completely devoid of any emotional tremor. It fills the room with the resonant, commanding clarity of absolute truth. I believe you have some questions regarding the metallurgical fusion protocols utilized on your family's heirloom. I am fully prepared to provide the answers. King Edward does not raise his voice. He simply raises a single immaculately manicured hand. The gesture is entirely effortless, yet it possesses the gravitational pull of a collapsing star. The effect on the room is instantaneous and absolute. Vivian's frantic gaslighting dies in her throat, choking her. Chloe's manufactured sobs are abruptly cut off, replaced by a sharp, terrified intake of breath. Winston freezes his hand, still hovering protectively over my mother's shoulder. The royal guards standing by the door subtly shift their weight, their hands resting lightly near their sides, enforcing the monarch's silent command. The grand study is plunged into a silence so profound it feels pressurized. The king ignores my parents completely. He ignores the weeping woman in the ruined couture gown who was scheduled to become his daughter-in-law in less than 3 hours. He fixes his pale, hawkish eyes entirely on me. He is a man who has spent a lifetime detecting the microscopic cracks in diplomatic treaties and the subtle tells of lying politicians. He is searching my face for the slightest tremor of deceit, the faintest shadow of the instability my mother just aggressively advertised. He finds a brick wall. Your sister, King Edward, begins his voice like the slow grinding of ancient stones claimed. The structural integrity of the base was secured using a standard palladium bonding agent. He gestures slowly toward the chalice, resting under the ultraviolet lamp on the mahogany desk. Tell me, Miss Williams, if one were to apply a palladium bonding agent to a 17th century silver and copper matrix, while attempting to preserve the thermal stability of untreated sapphires, what would be the precise molecular outcome? It is a trap. It is a beautiful, lethal, expertly laid trap. The chief archivist standing beside the king watches me with a hungry, desperate intensity. They are testing me. They are throwing me directly into the deep end of the metallurgical pool to see if I drown like the fraud sweating in the corner, or if I can swim. Catastrophic fragmentation. Your Majesty, I reply instantly. My voice is clear, ringing off the leather-bound books lining the walls. A palladium bonding agent requires a working temperature of over 1500 degrees Celsius. That temperature would instantly vaporize the original copper ratio in the medieval alloy. The thermal shock would travel straight through the gold core and fracture your family's uncut sapphires into worthless gravel in less than 3 seconds. Anyone who actually touched a micro-welding torch to this artifact would know that to be an absolute, undeniable fact. A sharp, pathetic whimper escapes Chloe's lips. Prince Julian turns his head slowly to look at his bride, his face a mask of dawning horrified realization. He is watching the woman he intended to marry be stripped of her fake brilliance in real time. I do not stop. I lean slightly forward, taking complete command of the room's academic airspace. To successfully fuse that specific structural cage, I continue, you cannot use modern commercial agents. I had to forge a customized, chemically flawed binding material, matching the exact original ratio of 60% silver to 40% copper. I utilized a localized borax flux compound to prevent rapid oxidation, applying heat in microbursts no longer than 0.4 seconds each. One fraction of a second longer and the jewels would have been permanently destroyed. The chief archivist closes his eyes and exhales a long, shaky breath of pure, unadulterated relief. He gives the king a swift, highly emphatic nod. The confirmation is absolute. The technical terminology I just rattled off is impossible to fake. It is the language of a true master. My sister is a public relations executive, I say, letting my gaze drift momentarily to where Chloe is practically shrinking into the velvet drapes. She specializes in crafting narratives and manipulating optics. She intercepted the digital dossier I provided to your broker 6 months ago. She memorized the glossary, but she fundamentally did not understand the science. She tried to wear my genius as a costume to purchase her seat at your table. I, however, am the master archivist who actually rebuilt your family legacy. I reach into my leather briefcase. I do not ask for permission. I pull out my heavy encrypted tablet. I place it flat on the polished mahogany desk right next to the glowing chalice. I type in my 40-character alphanumeric passcode with rapid, practiced keystrokes. The screen awakens with a bright, sharp light. I turn the tablet around to face King Edward and his chief archivist. In my profession, I state coldly we do not rely on tears or dramatic storytelling. We rely on receipts. I swipe the screen, bringing up the first archived file. These are the time-stamped macro photographs of the chalice. I tap the high-resolution images, expanding them for the king to see. You will notice the background is not a glossy public relations office. It is my restoration studio in Boston. You can clearly see the exposed brick, my specific chemical ventilation hoods, and my specialized stereo microscope. The timestamps embedded in the metadata clearly indicate the artifact was in my physical possession for 21 days, ending precisely 6 months ago. The king leans forward. The chief archivist practically hovers over the tablet, his eyes darting across the images. He compares the jagged, oxidized structural fractures in my before photographs to the flawlessly fused joints on the physical chalice resting on the desk. The visual match is indisputable. I swipe the screen again, bringing up a complex spreadsheet. Here are the chemical receipts for the specific borax flux compound and the raw, unpurified silver and copper I ordered to forge the binding agent. The delivery dates and the supplier invoices align perfectly with the restoration window. I swipe a third time, opening my secure communications folder. These are the encrypted emails exchanged between myself and your royal broker, a man operating under the alias Sterling. They detail the exact shipping manifests, the armored transport delivery schedules, and the stringent non-disclosure agreements I was required to sign before the lockbox ever arrived at my loading dock. Winston lets out a low, strangled groan from the corner of the room. My father is a corporate lawyer. He makes his living destroying people with paper trails. He is staring at the tablet, recognizing the insurmountable wall of evidence I have just casually dropped onto the king's desk. In a court of law, this is called an open and shut case. In the court of a European monarch, it is an execution. Vivian is gripping Winston's arm so tightly her manicured nails are likely drawing blood. Their perfect aristocratic fantasy is bleeding out on the Persian rug. And finally, I say, my voice dropping to a low, commanding resonance. I pull up the final file on the tablet. It is the extreme digital magnification image. As a master restorer, I never leave my labor unmarked. It is a matter of professional integrity and personal insurance against exactly this kind of theft. I point to the screen showing the glowing blue image. I etched a microscopic ghost signature directly into the thickest portion of the fused silver joint on the underside of the heavy gold base. It is a lotus flower, tightly interlaced with my initials. It requires a specific wavelength of ultraviolet light to be seen. It is the exact mark your appraisers just discovered 30 minutes ago. King Edward looks from the tablet to the physical chalice glowing under the inspection lamp, then up to my face. The pieces lock together in his mind with the heavy final click of a vault door shutting. The sheer scale of my family's deception is laid bare, anchored by irrefutable digital and physical evidence. Chloe did not just lie about a hobby. She orchestrated a massive, premeditated fraud involving a sacred royal artifact, and my parents were ready to throw me into a psychiatric ward to cover her tracks. The king slowly leans back in his leather chair. The terrifying stillness returns to his posture. He looks at me with a profound, piercing respect. He sees the woman my family tried to bury. He sees the intellect they tried to dismiss as socially unfit. He sees the absolute, uncompromising truth. The grand study is completely silent, save for the pathetic, ragged sound of my sister weeping in the corner, mourning the death of a crown she was never truly fit to wear. I do not close the tablet. The grand study remains suspended in a heavy, pressurized silence following the undeniable proof of my maker's mark, but I am not finished. Exposing my sister as a fraud is merely the correction of a historical record. It is a matter of professional pride. But the meticulous, deeply ingrained nature of my work demands that every single ledger be balanced. When you restore an artifact, you must account for every missing fragment, every altered chemical bond, and every discrepancy in the provenance. I look at King Edward, whose imposing posture has settled into a cold, terrifying stillness. He believes the deception has been fully uncovered. He believes he has seen the absolute bottom of my family's treachery. He is incorrect. Your Majesty, I say, my voice cutting through the ambient hum of the estate's massive air conditioning system. The theft of intellectual property and the falsification of a royal restoration are profound insults to your family's legacy. But they are not the only crimes committed in this room. My sister did not merely steal my portfolio to purchase her social standing, she also stole your money. The chief archivist inhales sharply. King Edward narrows his pale eyes, the calculating intellect behind them flashing with renewed dangerous intensity. In the corner of the room, Chloe stops weeping. The wet, ragged sounds of her manufactured panic are instantly replaced by the terrifying, suffocating silence of a woman who realizes the executioner has just loaded a second magazine. I swipe my finger across the glass screen of my encrypted tablet. I bypass the macro photographs and the chemical logs, navigating directly into the highly secure financial directories I compiled while cross-referencing the broker's data. I open a master spreadsheet, expanding the columns to display a series of international wire transfers, routing numbers and dates. I turn the screen slightly so both the king and the chief archivist have a completely unobstructed view of the data. 6 months ago, I explained, keeping my tone as clinical and detached as a forensic accountant presenting evidence to a grand jury. Your royal treasury authorized a payment for the preservation of this chalice. The commission fee was set at $150,000. That capital was transferred from your state accounts to the elite cultural heritage firm in London, managed by your broker. The protocol required those funds to be routed through the secure financial channels of the Global Public Relations Agency, where my sister is employed as a senior executive director. The agency was supposed to act as a blind intermediary, retaining their standard handling fee and releasing the bulk of the commission to the ghost restorer. To me, I tap a specific row on the spreadsheet, highlighting a transaction in bright, unyielding yellow. I never received that royal commission from the agency. I was paid my $150,000 directly from the personal offshore accounts of the broker, who was frantic to ensure the restoration was not delayed by administrative bottlenecks. He assumed the agency was simply experiencing a bureaucratic processing error. He intended to reimburse himself once the corporate red tape cleared. I swiped to the next document, displaying a complex web of corporate tax identification numbers and banking pathways. I traced the path of your royal funds with my index finger. Chloe used her senior executive clearance to intercept the payment profile. She recognized the invoice attached to the Chalice project. Instead of authorizing the transfer to the broker, she generated a fraudulent vendor profile. She rerouted the entire $150,000 of royal capital away from the heritage firm and funneled it directly into a domestic shell account registered in Delaware. My father, Winston, lets out a sound that can only be described as a physical manifestation of his soul leaving his body. He is a corporate attorney. He has spent his entire career navigating the treacherous waters of corporate liability and financial regulations. He is staring at the bright screen of my tablet from across the room, and even from a distance, he recognizes the specific alphanumeric structure of a shell corporation's routing data. He knows exactly what I am describing. He knows that his golden perfect daughter has not just committed a severe social faux pas, she has committed federal wire fraud. She has embezzled a massive sum of money from the sovereign treasury of a European monarch. Winston literally stumbles backward, his shoulder blades hitting the heavy mahogany bookshelves. The aggressive posturing patriarch who banned me from this estate is entirely gone, replaced by a terrified hollow shell of a man facing absolute ruin. I do not look at my parents. I keep my focus entirely on the transaction history, forcing the royal men to see the undeniable math. This Delaware account, I continue smoothly, was incorporated under a generic media consulting title. But the managing director listed on the incorporation documents shares a residential address and a social security number with my sister. I look up from the screen and turn my gaze directly toward Chloe. She is pressed flat against the wall, her skin a translucent, sickly shade of white. The heavy imported silk of her custom couture wedding gown pools around her feet like a collapsed parachute. The gown is a masterpiece of bridal architecture heavily embroidered with hand-sewn pearls and crystals. It is the kind of garment that demands an astronomical price tag. She did not just steal the credit for the restoration to impress you, I say, my voice ringing with absolute uncompromising clarity. She stole your treasury funds to finance her bridal aesthetic. The $150,000 was systematically drained from that shell account over the past 4 months. It was used to pay the exorbitant deposits for the imported floral installations currently wilting on your lawn. It was used to purchase the custom diamond tennis bracelet currently sitting on her right wrist. It was used to commission the very dress she is wearing right now. The silence in the grand study becomes weaponized. It is a heavy, crushing force that pushes all the oxygen out of the room. I have laid out the ultimate unforgivable truth. Chloe did not just lie about her cultural appreciation. She actively, deliberately robbed her future father-in-law to fund the elaborate disguise she used to deceive him. She made the king pay for the privilege of being conned. Prince Julian finally moves. He has been standing frozen near the black marble fireplace since the moment I walked through the heavy oak doors, completely paralyzed by the systematic dismantling of the woman he loved. Now the paralysis breaks. He takes slow, deliberate steps away from the hearth, moving toward the center of the room. His ceremonial military uniform, adorned with golden braids and medals of honor, suddenly looks incredibly stark against the dark Persian rug. Julian stops a few feet away from the mahogany desk. He does not look at the glowing tablet. He does not need to see the routing numbers or the Delaware Incorporation documents. The absolute, unadulterated truth is already suffocating the room. He slowly turns his head and looks directly at Chloe. The expression on the prince's face is devastating. There is no heartbreak. There is no sorrow. There is only a profound, visceral revulsion. He looks at the woman standing against the wall, wrapped in thousands of dollars of stolen silk, dripping with diamonds purchased through corporate embezzlement. The romantic illusion, the modern American fairy tale that my family had so ruthlessly engineered, evaporates entirely. Julian does not see a brilliant public relations executive or a dedicated guardian of his family's cultural heritage. He sees a common greedy thief. He sees a parasite who attempted to latch onto his bloodline by draining his family's coffers and wearing the stolen funds as a wedding gown, Julian Chloe whispers. The sound is barely audible, a pathetic, ragged plea escaping her throat. She takes a tiny, trembling step forward, holding her hands out toward him in a gesture of desperate supplication. Please, I just wanted everything to be perfect for us. I just wanted your family to think I was worthy. Julian does not flinch. He does not offer a single word of comfort. His blue eyes are completely empty of warmth, reflecting the absolute icy contempt of generations of aristocratic pride. The disgust radiating from his posture is so intense, it practically lowers the temperature in the study. He takes a single deliberate step backward, physically recoiling from her proximity, as if her very presence is a contagion. The facade is entirely destroyed. There is no spinning this crisis. There is no public relations strategy that can sanitize international wire fraud and the embezzlement of royal funds. Vivian and Winston are standing completely paralyzed by the bookshelves, their faces frozen in masks of absolute, unmitigated horror. They spent their entire lives worshipping at the altar of elite social status. They sacrificed their eldest daughter to protect their proximity to power. And now they are forced to watch as their golden child, driven by the exact same blinding greed they instilled in her, burns their entire legacy to ash. I stand silently by the mahogany desk, my hand resting lightly next to my encrypted tablet. The chalice glows under the ultraviolet lamp, the microscopic lotus flower, a permanent testament to my invisible labor. I do not feel a shred of pity for the weeping woman in the stolen dress, or the terrified parents pressed against the wall. I have delivered the final fatal blow to their magnificent house of cards with mathematical precision. The truth has been fully illuminated, and the resulting destruction is absolute. The devastating reality of international wire fraud hangs in the grand study, a thick, suffocating fog that my parents are desperately trying to breathe through. Winston is the first to break the paralysis. He is a man who has built an entire corporate legal career on cutting his losses, mitigating liability, and destroying opposing counsel. But today, the opposing counsel is his own blood, and the judge is a European monarch with unlimited resources. Winston looks at his golden child, the daughter he has paraded around Atlanta high society for 32 years, and he makes a brutal, instantaneous calculation. He chooses to sever the infected limb to save the body. He knows the federal implications of wire fraud, and he refuses to be named as a co-conspirator. Winston steps away from the bookshelf, physically distancing himself from Chloe, as if her proximity might transmit a fatal disease. Your Majesty. He begins, his voice trembling with a frantic, uncharacteristic urgency that completely shatters his usual courtroom composure. We had absolutely no knowledge of this financial maneuvering. We were completely blind to her actions. My father does not move to comfort his weeping daughter. He throws her directly into the path of the incoming train. He looks at King Edward with wide, desperate eyes sweating through his custom tuxedo. Chloe acted entirely on her own accord. We thought she was coordinating a legitimate cultural exchange. We would never condone the misappropriation of sovereign funds. We are a family of the law, and we are just as victimized by her deception as you are. Vivian takes her cue immediately. My mother is a survivalist wrapped in couture. She recognizes that the royal proximity she craved her entire life is rapidly vaporizing, so she pivots to the only remaining asset in the room that holds any verifiable value. She pivots to me. Vivian turns her back on the ruined bride and takes 2 rapid steps toward the mahogany desk, entirely abandoning the daughter she spent decades turning into a mirror of herself. She forces her rigid facial muscles into a mask of maternal shock and desperate affection. Jasmine, she pleads, her voice pitched to project innocent, heartbroken devastation. Please, you must explain to His Majesty that we are a respectable family. Tell them we had nothing to do with this terrible mistake. Tell them how much we have always supported your restoration business. Vivian actually reaches out her manicured hand, hovering in the air, as if she intends to touch my arm to establish a physical bond. We always knew you were a genius. We always celebrated your incredible talent. We just wanted you to shine today. We love you so much, Jasmine. You have to tell them the truth about us. I look at the woman who birthed me. I look at the man who funded my exclusion. I feel absolute ice in my veins. The temperature of my blood drops to absolute zero, freezing any lingering childhood instinct to seek their approval. I do not raise my voice. I do not shout. I deliver the verdict with the surgical precision of a scalpel cutting through diseased tissue. You supported my business by calling it playing with old junk to your country club friends, I say, ensuring every syllable is sharp, distinct, and dripping with cold reality. You supported my talent by banning me from this estate 24 hours ago. You told me I was a liability. You told me my natural hair and my unpolished aesthetic would ruin your perfect royal photographs. You uninvited me because I was an embarrassment. I let the word hang in the air, allowing it to echo off the vaulted ceiling and sink deep into their bones. Then I deliver the final crushing blow. The only embarrassment in this room is the family you created. You raised a daughter who believed she had to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars to earn her seat at a table, and you enabled her every single step of the way because her greed perfectly matched your own. I am not your character witness. I am your reckoning. Vivian lets out a sharp, pathetic gasp, shrinking back as if I have struck her across the face with a physical weapon. The silence that follows is absolute and terrifying. There are no more lies to spin. There are no more public relations strategies to deploy. The naked, ugly truth of our entire family dynamic is completely exposed for the royal court to examine under a microscopic lens. Prince Julian does not offer a single word of debate. He does not ask for clarification or demand a second opinion. He looks at Chloe, who has slipped completely to the floor, her heavy silk gown pooling around her like a surrendered, defeated flag. She is staring up at him with ruined makeup and sheer terror, a hollow shell of the sophisticated woman she pretended to be. Julian raises his left hand. With deliberate, agonizingly slow movements, he grasps the heavy gold and platinum ceremonial engagement ring resting on his finger. He slides the massive diamond past his knuckle, discarding the symbol of their union with absolute revulsion. He walks forward, his military boots clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, and drops the ring directly onto the mahogany desk right next to my encrypted tablet. The heavy metal strikes the polished wood with a sharp, final clatter. The sound is the definitive, undeniable end of the modern fairy tale. The transaction is completely voided. King Edward rises from his leather chair. The monarch stands to his full imposing height, smoothing the front of his tailored suit jacket with absolute calm. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to project anger. His tone is practically freezing the oxygen in the room, stripping away any lingering hope of mercy. My family does not merge with thieves, the king states. The decree is absolute. It is a sentence handed down with centuries of aristocratic weight behind it. It is the verbal execution of the Atlanta vanguard. King Edward turns his pale, hawkish gaze to the elite royal guards standing rigidly by the heavy oak doors. "Escort them off my property," he orders. "Immediately, remove them from the premises." Commander Elias steps forward, signaling his highly trained security team. They move with swift, unyielding military precision. They do not gently guide my family out of the room. They march forward and physically flank Winston, Vivian, and Chloe, eliminating any possibility of resistance. The illusion of mutual respect is completely gone. They are treating my family like hostile intruders caught trespassing on sovereign soil. Chloe is sobbing hysterically, entirely unable to stand under her own power. Her legs give out beneath the weight of her stolen dress. Winston grabs her arm, hauling her roughly to her feet. His face is flushed crimson with the ultimate, unbearable humiliation of being forcefully ejected from the elite circle he sacrificed his eldest daughter to join. He looks like a man being dragged to the gallows, fully aware that his social destruction is imminent. Vivian looks back at me one last time as the guards march them toward the doors. Her eyes are wide with the terrifying realization that she is being cast out into the social wilderness forever. She is watching the daughter she discarded standing securely beside the throne, holding the absolute respect of the most powerful men in the room. I do not blink. I do not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. I stand perfectly still and watch them get marched out of the grand study. The heavy oak doors swing shut, closing firmly behind them with a resounding, permanent thud. The estate's chief communications director, who has been standing silently in the shadows near the bookshelves, receives a sharp, confirming nod from King Edward. The director immediately steps out through a discreet side door, his phone already pressed to his ear. He is walking out to face the global press corps swarming the front lawns. The thousands of journalists, diplomats, celebrities, and billionaires who have been waiting in agonizing suspense are about to receive the final update. Within seconds, the official announcement is broadcast across every major news network around the world. The royal wedding is officially and permanently cancelled due to irreconcilable breaches of trust and severe financial misconduct. I remain standing in the quiet study, the air conditioning slowly clearing the lingering scent of my mother's expensive perfume and my sister's panic. The chalice glows warmly on the desk, fully restored and perfectly safe. The chaos has been entirely expelled from the room, leaving behind a pristine, ordered silence. The storm has passed, and I am the only one left standing. The cancellation announcement outside the Newport estate triggered an absolute media feeding frenzy. Within 48 hours, the true story leaked to the global press. I did not have to speak to a single journalist or issue a single public statement. The Royal Communications Office released a highly sanitized but undeniably devastating official press release. They confirmed that the engagement was terminated permanently due to severe financial irregularities and the unauthorized interception of sovereign treasury funds. Chloe had spent her entire adult life mastering the art of the media spin, utilizing her connections to control narratives and bury scandals. But she was completely powerless against the monolithic legal machinery of a European nation. Her reputation as an elite public relations executive was obliterated overnight. The global agencies dropped her immediately. Her high-profile clients publicly distanced themselves. Then the federal authorities stepped in. The Delaware shell company she used to funnel the $150,000 left an undeniable digital footprint. The royal family's solicitors cooperated fully with the United States Attorney's Office. Chloe was facing multiple counts of international wire fraud and embezzlement. The golden child, the woman who had built her identity on being untouchable, was surrendering her passport and wearing an ankle monitor while awaiting her federal indictment. The collateral damage to my parents was equally absolute. Winston and Vivian returned to Atlanta expecting to rely on their vast network of high society friends to weather the storm. Instead, they found the doors of their elite circles permanently locked. Respectability politics is a double-edged sword. The same people my parents had desperately tried to impress now viewed them as toxic pariahs. Their prestigious country club revoked their membership, citing a direct violation of their morality clause. Winston saw a mass exodus of clients from his corporate law firm. No major corporation wanted their legal representation handled by a man whose daughter was under federal investigation for defrauding a monarch. His partners forced him into an unceremonious retirement to save the firm from the resulting public relations nightmare. Vivian was uninvited from every single charity board she chaired. Their carefully curated public image was entirely reduced to a cautionary tale of blind greed. They had sacrificed their eldest daughter to secure a crown, and the resulting collapse crushed their empire completely into dust. Meanwhile, my reality shifted into an entirely different stratosphere. King Edward did not just take the chalice back to his vaults and forget about the woman who restored it. He made a point to ensure that the true artist received absolute recognition. The Royal Communications Office issued a secondary press release. It publicly thanked the brilliant American archivist who preserved their sacred family history with unparalleled genius and absolute integrity. That single sentence acted as a global beacon. My encrypted inbox flooded with commission requests from the most exclusive private collectors, sovereign treasuries, and national museums on Earth. I was no longer a hidden restorer working in the shadows of the antiquities trade. I was the master archivist, personally endorsed by European royalty. I outgrew my old South End workspace within a week. I purchased a massive upscale commercial studio in Boston overlooking the harbor. I outfitted it with bank-level biometric security, climate-controlled archival vaults, and the most advanced metallurgical technology available. I hired a dedicated staff of junior apprentices and security personnel to handle my administrative protocols. My business skyrocketed to a level of wealth and influence that easily eclipsed my father's entire legal career. I was commanding commission fees that allowed me to dictate my own terms, selecting only the projects that genuinely fascinated me. The light coming off the harbor water illuminated my new primary workbench. The space smelled of fresh lemon oil-aged paper and undeniable success. I did not have to change my aesthetic. I still wore my sturdy denim aprons and kept my natural hair tied back. The difference was that the billionaires and museum directors flying into Boston to consult with me viewed my aesthetic as the uniform of an undisputed master. They did not ask me to perform. They paid for my absolute authenticity. I had achieved the ultimate freedom. I possessed a life entirely insulated from the toxic demands of my family. 6 weeks after the disastrous events in Newport, I was sitting at my new desk reviewing the structural analysis for an ancient Egyptian tapestry. The intercom on my desk chimed softly. My head of security informed me that a woman was standing in the lobby demanding to see me. She did not have an appointment, but she insisted it was a severe family emergency. I already knew exactly who it was. I instructed security to send her up to my private consultation room. I stood up, smoothed the front of my clothes, and walked into the consultation room, A beautiful space featuring floor-to-ceiling windows, minimal leather furniture, and a massive marble table. The heavy doors opened and Vivian walked in. My mother looked entirely unrecognizable. The icy, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society was gone. Her hair lacked its usual perfect volume and precise styling. Her designer clothes looked rumpled, as if she had been wearing them for days on end, without looking in a mirror. The stress of the federal investigations, the social exile, and the crushing financial burdens had visibly aged her by 10 years. She looked around the immaculate, highly secure facility, her eyes widening as she calculated the sheer scale of the wealth and power I had built in such a short amount of time. She realized far too late exactly who she had thrown away to chase an illusion. "Jasmine," she said, her voice shaking uncontrollably. She did not attempt her usual condescending tone. She sounded broken and incredibly small. "I need your help. Chloe is facing federal indictment. The legal fees are astronomical. Winston's firm forced him out and our accounts are frozen pending the investigation. We are going to lose the house in Atlanta." She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, expecting the daughter she had conditioned to seek her approval to finally step in and save them. She expected family loyalty to override a lifetime of emotional abuse. I walked over to the sleek marble table. I did not offer her a seat. I did not offer her a comforting embrace. I picked up a small silver box of tissues resting in the center of the table. I walked back to where she stood and held the box out to her. Vivian looked at the tissues, then up at my face, confusion masking her desperation. "Take one," I instructed calmly. "You are going to need it on your flight back to Atlanta." "Jasmine, please," she begged, a single tear escaping and rolling down her cheek. "You have so much now. You have the royal endorsement. You have this massive facility. You can afford the retainer for Chloe's defense team. She is your sister. We are your family. You cannot just leave us to drown." I looked at the woman who had handed me a brochure for an etiquette class because she found my natural existence offensive. I looked at the woman who had banned me from a wedding to protect her social climbing. I felt the ambient temperature in my chest remain perfectly peacefully regulated. There was no anger left in my system. There was no resentment. There was only the solid, unyielding reality of the boundary I had forged. "You uninvited me because I was an embarrassment," I said, my voice completely smooth and devoid of any emotional vulnerability. "You told me my presence would ruin your perfect royal picture. You told me I was not socially fit for your table." I set the box of tissues down on the cold marble surface. "So I built my own table." I continued holding her gaze with absolute uncompromising authority. "And there are no seats available for people who steal, lie, and treat my existence as a liability." Vivian let out a soft, pathetic sob. "But you are my daughter." "I was your scapegoat," I corrected her. "Now I am just the master archivist who exposed your fraud. You made your choices, Vivian. You chose the shiny, stolen illusion over the quiet, honest truth. Now you get to live with the absolute consequences of your greed." I turned toward the door and pressed a button on the wall panel. Two of my private security officers stepped into the room immediately. "You have 60 seconds to leave my property," I said, turning my back on her and walking toward the large glass window overlooking the harbor. "Do not attempt to contact me again. The next time you try to breach my security, my legal team will file a harassment injunction." I did not watch her face crumble. I did not listen to the ragged, desperate sounds she made as the security officers gently but firmly escorted her out of my consultation room. I simply stood by the window, watching the sunlight bounce off the dark blue water of the Boston harbor. The heavy doors closed, shutting out the noise of my mother's panic forever. The silence that rushed into the room was profound, beautiful, and permanent. I took a deep, centering breath, feeling the absolute, unshakable weight of my own autonomy. The toxic anchor that had dragged behind me for 35 years was officially severed. I turned away from the window and walked back into my studio, ready to return to my work, feeling nothing but profound, absolute peace.